Chapter 255. Qi Rongji came out from behind the plum tree. She looked as arrogant as when she was in Jiangzhou. Qin Wanru, I didn't expect that you would deliberately provoke Qin Yuru. You used to be well behaved, but I didn't expect that you would deliberately provoke Qin Yuru. Qin Wanru understood her pun. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth, and her lips were as beautiful as flowers. First Miss Qi, when will you leave? Her words implied that she wanted to drive Qi Rongji away. She knew that Qi Rongji couldn't help but jump out and come to her door after hearing her words. Qi Rongji was furious, and her eyes fell on Qin Wanru fiercely. Your Qin's mansion is not a good place. Of course, I will leave, and I will go far away. In the future, I will be the miss of Duke Xing's mansion, and you are just a bastard picked up. Once you leave, there will be a world of difference. When you see me in the future, you have to bow to me. First Miss Qi, even if you are the real miss of Duke Xing's mansion in the future, as long as we both have no ranks, it seems that I don't have to bow to you, right? Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said lightly. Her words made Qi Rongji blush. Today, she was very proud. Her elder brother did help her outside as she asked, and Madame of Duke Xing did send 4 gifts to recognize her as her relative. However, when she saw that the servant girls of Duke Xing's mansion were going to send gifts to the Qin sisters, she couldn't sit still. She followed the servant girl and secretly stared at Qin Wanru. When she saw that the gifts Madame of Duke Xing gave Qin Wanru were much more valuable than hers, she immediately became jealous and had a feeling that her things had been robbed. As for the fact that she robbed the title of adopted daughter, in her opinion, it was originally hers, and Madame of Duke Xing was just temporarily bewitched by Qin Wanru. First Miss Qi, why don't you go to pack up? Maybe Madame of Duke Xing will directly send someone to take you away. Qin Wanru turned around and looked like she didn't want to talk to her anymore. Her contemptuous look made Qi Rongji so angry that her face turned pale. Stop right there! She yelled. Seeing her unforgiving look, Chun-Yi pulled her sleeve suggestively, indicating that she should be careful. After all, this was still the Qin's mansion, and the second Miss Qin in front of her was no longer the second Miss Qin who could be beaten and punished at will. What's the matter? Qin Wanru turned her head and asked coldly. Her indifferent look made Qi Rongji want to give Qin Wanru 2 hard slaps, but she gritted her teeth and endured it. Where's that pair of earrings? I'll take them to Qin Yuru. Qin Wanru didn't say anything and just nodded. Yujie took 2 steps forward and handed over a small gift box. Chun-Yi hurriedly stepped forward to take it and then stepped aside. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, eldest Miss still listened to eldest young master. Since first Miss Qi is willing to give the earrings to big sister, thank you very much. But big sister may not be in a good mood now. If she offends first Miss Qi, I hope first Miss Qi can forgive her. Qin Wanru said indifferently and left slowly with Yujie. She didn't even look at Qi Rongji, and her behavior didn't show any more envy because Qi Rongji was about to become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing. Lu Rongji felt like punching on cotton. Fake, Qin Wanru's performance must be fake. She must be envious of her and deliberately pretended not to care about her. Go, let's go to see first Miss Qin. She almost said these words while gnashing her teeth. Qin Wanru and Qin Yuru were not good people. Since she couldn't get anything good from Qin Wanru, she would go to Qin Yuru to get it back. For so many years, Qi Rongji had always thought and acted in this way. The difference was that in the past, if she couldn't get anything good from Qin Yuru, then she would go to Qin Wanru to get it back. With such a breath, Qi Rongji went to Qin Yuru's Yalan Pavilion. Unexpectedly, when she arrived at the door of Yalan Pavilion, she was blocked by 2 old maids. First Miss Qi, our first miss is copying calligraphy. She won't see you for the time being. After an old maid came over and saluted, she said politely. Qi Rongji also knew that Qin Yuru was grounded, but she didn't expect that there was someone guarding here. She rolled her eyes and said with a smile, I may leave Qin's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing has recognized me as her adopted daughter. This time I come here to send a gift to First Miss Qin on behalf of Madame of Duke Xing. First Miss Qi, please. The two old maids looked at each other, hesitated for a moment, and then stepped back to let her go. Their guarding here was not as strict as Madame D's. Qi Rongji came over to ask them routinely. Since the reason was reasonable, they didn't stop her. Qi Rongji walked inside with Chun Yi. A servant girl had already seen it and reported it. Seeing her coming, Mei Shui, who served Qin Yuru, appeared at the door with a haggard face and lifted the curtain for her. When she entered the room, she saw Qin Yuru sitting in the room with a gloomy face. The so-called writing was just a few pieces of paper thrown on the desk by the window in a mess, as well as some writing brushes, ink, and other things in disorder. Qin Yuru, how is your writing? Qi Rongji raised her head proudly. What are you doing here? There were no outsiders here, so Qin Yuru said with a bad face. Of course I'm here to see how down and out you are. First Miss Qin, who once charmed my elder brother in Jiangzhou, is now locked up here and can't get out. And your fiancé, who abandoned my elder brother, probably won't even come to see you, right? Qin Yuru, I really feel sorry for you. Qi Rongji sat down on a chair on one side, glanced at the situation in the room proudly, and said sarcastically. What do you mean? Qin Yuru's face was livid, and she stared at Qi Rongji coldly. Now there was no one else here, so they didn't need to pretend to have deep sisterly love. They were both themselves. I really just come to see your miserable situation. Of course, I also want to tell you that I will leave soon. Madame of Duke Xing has decided to recognize me as her adopted daughter, so I will be the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion in the future. Qin Yuru, have you ever thought that one day I will step on your head? Qi Rongji patted the dust on her sleeves, which was not there at all, and became more and more complacent. Madame of Duke Xing wants to recognize you as her adopted daughter. Qin Wanru was stunned. She was grounded and not well informed, so she didn't know this. Of course, and she also wants to take me to live in Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Yuru, you wanted to please Madame of Duke Xing at that time, and you were even willing to bully that little child, just to let Madame of Duke Xing look at you more, right? But now, Madame of Duke Xing won't look at you more. Qi Rongji smacked her lips and raised her eyebrows proudly. Her words revealed the embarrassing scene in Qin Yuru's heart, and her face darkened for a moment. Just now, Madame of Duke Xing sent someone to give me a gift to recognize my family, and also a pair of earrings for you. After all, I will also live in your mansion after I come to the capital city. Madame of Duke Xing wants to thank you for me. Qi Rongji leaned back and waved her hand. Chuani came forward and put a very small gift box on the tea table in front of Qin Yuru. Look, it's always Madame of Duke Xing's mood. Since you came to the capital city, you have not been in a good situation. It's rare that my adopted mother thinks highly of you. Qi Rongji even called her adopted mother at this time. Qin Yuru trembled with anger. She swung her hand fiercely, and the gift box was thrown out by her sleeves and fell heavily on the ground. The lid of the box was opened, and a pair of exquisite earrings fell out. You have such a bad temper. What did my elder brother like about you at that time? Qin Yuru, you don't have good looks or manners, and you're so slutty. When you were engaged to my elder brother, you had already hooked up with Child D. You're such an unscrupulous woman. Whoever marries her will be unlucky. Maybe Child D will be surrounded by a green cloud at that time. Without outsiders around, Qi Rongji could be considered to have let go at this time. Her words became more and more unpleasant, and even Chuni who followed her couldn't help blushing. She didn't know where Qi Rongji heard such shameless words in the market. She was a lady from a respectable family, but she dared to say such words. Qi Rongji, don't go too far. Qin Yuru said with a livid face. She suddenly stood up and said sternly. What? Do you want to hit me? Qin Yuru, I'm warning you. I'm not the daughter of the magistrate of Jiangzhou anymore. I'm the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion. This identity is beyond your reach. If you really offend me, I'll ask my adoptive mother to reveal all your scandals in Jiangzhou. Let's see if you still have the face to come out in the future. Qi Rongji was not a person who was willing to suffer losses. She also stood up and shouted loudly. Chuanyi and Mei Shui saw that the situation was not good, so they pulled them aside one by one, for fear that they would fight again. They would be grounded at most and punished to copy a few words, but the two servant girls would be miserable. They might be scolded and beaten again. Qi Rongji, get out. Qin Yuru suppressed the anger in her heart, stretched out her hand and pointed outside, and said coldly. Of course I will go, Qin Yuru. Don't think that this is Jiangzhou. This is the capital city. The name of Ningyuan Army General's mansion is not as good as that of Jiangzhou. Qi Rongji snorted coldly, turned around and walked a few steps. Suddenly she stopped, squatted down and picked up the pair of earrings at her feet. She put them in front of her eyes and looked at them. Then she turned back to the tea table beside Qin Yuru and patted the earrings. Qin Yuru, my adoptive mother gave you earrings, but you don't care about it. Very well, I must tell my adoptive mother about it. Qi Rongji said sharply. Okay, you say it. Go and tell her now. Qin Yuru trembled with anger. She had always lived a smooth life, and no one could make her so angry. Humph, you wait and see. Qi Rongji turned around proudly. The earrings were really broken, and one of the beads inlaid on them was loose. She must tell Madame of Duke Xing when there was a chance. First Miss Qi and First Miss really quarreled again. I heard that they quarreled very fiercely, and the old maids guarding outside heard it. Qin Yu reported. Qin Wanru casually picked up a pair of earrings and looked at them. They were a very delicate pair of earrings, very beautiful, and the pearls inlaid on them were also good. But they could not be compared with the pearls given by Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing was really willing to spend the capital. They didn't fight, did they? They didn't fight this time. But after First Miss Qi left, an old maid beside First Miss went to the kitchen to get pastries for First Mississippi. First Miss is really broad-minded. She just quarreled with First Miss Qi, and now she can eat. Qing Yu sighed. She was sent by Qin Wanru to keep an eye on Yalan Pavilion, and then she followed the old maid to the kitchen. Seeing the old maid in the kitchen who took a lot of pastries, she was very speechless. She was tired of quarreling, and now she wanted to eat. Take pastries to eat. Qin Wanru was slightly stunned. She slowly put down the pearls in her hand, and her eyes showed a trace of seriousness. Chapter 256. Yes, she took a lot. First Mrs. behavior is really weird. Qing Yu said in surprise. What kind of pastries did she take? Qin Wanru asked with her eyes darkening. She took some ordinary pastries. She took some of the pastries made in the main kitchen. The old maid said First Miss needed to write and would be hungry soon, so she asked the people in the main kitchen to take some of each kind. Qing Yu thought for a while and said. Every kind? Qin Wanru frowned. It seemed that it was not a simple matter. Yes, every kind, and a lot of them. Some of them didn't make a lot, so the supervisor of the main kitchen explained it to the old maid. Qin Yu entered the main kitchen later and said that she was cooking bird's nest porridge for Qin Wanru. Because the bird's nest porridge was not ready, she waited in the kitchen for a while. So she listened to the whole thing openly. What do you mean by some of them didn't make a lot? Qin Wanru thought for a while and caught the vague meaning in Qing Yu's words. In fact, it's not that there weren't many left. Some of them were First Miss Qi's favorite and the kitchen had sent them to her. There weren't many left. Even if First Miss wanted more, there weren't any left. The supervisor of the kitchen explained it to the old maid beside First Miss. The pastries that Qi Rongji liked. Qin Wanru was shocked. Then what happened? Since there weren't any left, but First Miss said she wanted to eat it, the supervisor of the main kitchen said to make more for First Miss. Qing Yu said. No matter how bad Qin Yuru's reputation was, she was still the first miss of the mansion. Now the rumors outside said that second miss was not the biological daughter of the general, so the only biological daughter was first Mississippi. The servants in the mansion dared not to offend Qin Yuru. Did you make the pastries that Qi Rongji liked? Yes, those. There weren't enough of them, so I specially made some more. Qin Yu said. Qin Wanru nodded and picked up the bird's nest porridge that Qin Yu just brought to her. She ate a few mouthfuls and put down the spoon in her hand. Do I have a bowl of bird's nest porridge in the afternoon? Shui Rulan was worried that Qin Wanru only ate bird's nest as a supplement. After all, she was still young, so she asked the kitchen to cook some bird's nest porridge for her from time to time. Yes. Qin Yu nodded. Bring me a freshly made pastry. Just 1 or 2 pieces will do. She wanted to see what Qin Yuru was up to. It was certain that Qin Yuru was up to no good. However, Qin Yuru liked to shift the blame to others. If there was anyone in the mansion that she wanted to shift the blame to, needless to say, Qin Yuru would definitely be at the top. Yes, miss, I understand. Qin Yu nodded knowingly. While they were talking, Yujia lifted the curtain and walked in angrily. Looking at her face, Qin Wanru couldn't help laughing. What's wrong? Yujia had gone out for her just now to see how Nanny Dong's shop was prepared. It was obvious that Nanny Dong was angry and came back. Miss, they are talking about our mansion. Yujia said angrily. So what? Am I not allowed to talk about it? Qin Wanru said with a smile, not taking it seriously at all. But they are talking about you, miss. Yujia looked dissatisfied. She had been with Qin Wanru since she went down the mountain. She was loyal to Qin Wanru and couldn't bear to hear bad things about Qin Wanru. What are you afraid of? The more people talk about it, the better. Qin Wanru stood up, walked to the window, and opened it. Immediately, a gust of cold wind rushed in, and Qin Yu couldn't help shivering. Qin Wanru was also very cold and shivered. However, no matter how cold it was, she would not close herself in the corner of the yard like in her previous life, almost isolated from the outside world, unable to hear the voices of people outside, and unable to feel the air outside. Talking about her? Very good, she was worried that the momentum was not enough. It seemed like someone had intervened again. Matters in the capital were no small matter. Even if it was a matter between a man and a woman, it could evolve into a game between several forces. And what he wanted was the result of that game. Miss, don't open the window in this weather. You will catch a cold. Qin Yu came to complain and reached out to close the window for her. More and more people are talking about it. Being blown by the cold wind, Qin Wanru felt a little dizzy, but she was very sober. Touching the bun that was messed up by the cold wind, Qin Wanru turned back and asked with a smile. Yes, it seems to be more than before. Yujia pouted and said. On her way, she heard more and more people talking about it. Miss, Madam of Duke Xing has decided to adopt Miss Qi as her daughter. Is there anyone who wants to make trouble? This question made Qin Wanru shake her head. She really didn't know. Even if she vaguely knew some important things in her previous life, she didn't know how many people were involved in it. This kind of thing was far from known by a girl who lived in a boudoir. Don't worry about it. Since it has been spread, let it be spread. Qin Wanru sat in front of the dressing table. Qin Yu skillfully opened her bun that was messed up by the wind and combed it for her again. The girl in the mirror had a face like a hibiscus flower, delicate and beautiful. Her delicate lips and pure eyes made her extraordinarily charming. For a moment, Qin Yu, who was used to seeing Qin Wanru's face, couldn't help but be amazed. Mrs. Face was getting more and more beautiful, and it was getting more and more amazing. When she was in Jiangzhou, although she knew that her Miss was beautiful and delicate, compared with First Miss and First Miss Qi, her Miss was still a child who hadn't grown up and didn't attract much attention. But now in the capital city, the appearance of First Miss and First Miss Chi couldn't be compared with that of her Mississippi Miss. What will happen if the general hears it? Yujie followed her and said worriedly. If father takes it seriously, let him take it seriously. Qin Wanru said with an ambiguous look. She wanted to know her background very much. Now there happened to be such a rumor, and many people added fuel to the fire behind it. Of course, she hoped that the more people spread it, the better. She wanted to know the truth. If there was no external force, it would be very difficult to get the truth. What happened to Qi Rongji was a good excuse. Qi Tianyu's involvement would make this matter as big as possible. Then, it would not be so difficult for him to find out the original secret. Miss, you are. Yujie blushed and said with difficulty. This was not something that a servant girl like her should ask. Whether? I don't know. Qin Wanru sighed softly, and her voice was like smoke. Just wait and see. Since the matter had been spread like this, her father and grandmother would give her an explanation no matter what. And now she was waiting for this explanation to confirm her guess. What happened to those people? Since these things were just guesses, Qin Wanru didn't verify whether it was true or not. She didn't want to talk about it for the time being, so she changed the topic and asked. Are they the people who were brought back by the general and locked up in the yard over there? Yujie was stunned for a moment, and then she immediately understood and reported with a serious face. Yes, no one went to see them. Qin Wanru asked again. No, Nanny, you just said that no one went there. Yujie shook her head. Although it was Nanny Yu who sent people to keep an eye on this matter, things would be reported to Qin Wanru through Yujie from time to time. Let's go and have a look. Looking at her combed hair in the mirror, Qin Wanru turned her head and said. Miss, you can't go there. This time they are guarded by the general's guards, and no one is allowed to visit them. Yujie hurriedly stopped her. This yard was guarded so tightly that Yujie couldn't go there even if she wanted to. So tightly guarded? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Yes, very tightly guarded. Yujie nodded. Is there any way to get in? I have no way. Yujie shook her head helplessly. She had gone to see them several times before, but there was really no way to do it. Did mother go to see them? Qin Wanru thought for a moment and asked. Madame Shui went to see them once, and when she came back, she was so angry that her face turned pale. After that, she never went there again. Yujie had been keeping an eye on Madame D's people, so she didn't count the time when Madame Shui went to see them. Since mother has seen them, of course, I can also go and see them. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and stood up. Let's go to see mother first. Seeing that she had made up her mind, the two servant girls didn't persuade her anymore. Qin Yu stayed to clean the room, and Yujie accompanied Qin Wanru to Shui Rulan's yard. Shui Rulan was resting in the room. Hearing that Qin Wanru came over, she hurriedly asked someone to invite her in. After entering the room, Qin Wanru bowed to Shui Rulan and asked directly, Mother, father brought those people here. Are they from your previous family? Shui Rulan was stunned for a moment, and her face was a little pale. She hesitated and asked, How do you know? I heard from the two old maids in the mansion that they seem to be the people around Big Sister. Qin Wanru said. Madame D and the people around her were all locked up, but Qin Yuru's punishment was not as severe as Madame D's. Even if she didn't come out herself, the people around her could still go in and out. Hearing this, Shui Rulan's face turned red, and she was a little angry. Did they say something bad about me again? They didn't say that. They just said that these people are related to mother. Mother, can I go and see them? Qin Wanru said bluntly. What are you going to do? Shui Rulan frowned and said, You are a child, don't worry about those things. I and your father will deal with it. Mother, I'm not old anymore. I will help you solve your problems. These people come from thousands of miles away. Is this really the only thing they can do? Mother, don't you think it's too easy to investigate these people? Qin Wanru reminded her, reached out to pull Shui Rulan's hand, and shook it. Mother, there are some things you can't ask, but I can ask. Shui Rulan was the person involved, and she was remarried. Her former husband's family came after her. It was indeed inconvenient for her to ask some things, but she was worried if she didn't ask, for fear that Qin Huayong would ask something. However, Qin Huayong was so busy recently that he had no time to deal with these people. On the other hand, he felt that since these people had entered Qin's mansion, they could not escape, so he was not in a hurry. But you are still young. Although she knew that Qin Wanru was suitable, Shui Rulan was still very hesitant. Chapter 257. This courtyard was the most remote place near the back door of the Qin's mansion. There were not many masters in the Qin's mansion, so some courtyards were empty. The two guards guarding the door saw Shui Rulan coming with Qin Wanru and hurried forward to salute respectfully. The general had ordered that apart from him, only Madame Shui was allowed to see the people inside. Are they all right? Shui Rulan asked. Nothing serious. They just went on a hunger strike for a while and scolded others for a while. We have calmed them down now. A guard reported. Can I go in and have a look? Shui Rulan asked politely. Madame Shui can, but second miss. The guard looked at Qin Wanru, who followed Shui Rulan in embarrassment and hesitated for a moment. Did the general say that I am not allowed to go in with second miss? Shui Rulan said softly. The guard shook his head. If I go in alone, I am afraid that they will do something. With second miss around, she can protect me. Shui Rulan reached out to touch her pregnant belly, glanced at Qin Wanru beside her, and said with a gentle smile. Then Madam and second miss, go and come back soon. The two guards looked at each other and then looked at Shui Rulan's belly. After hesitating for a moment, they made way for them. Okay, I will be back as soon as possible. Shui Rulan nodded with a smile and walked inside first. Qin Wanru walked a few steps forward and stopped in front of her. She waved at her and then stepped into the courtyard. Yu Jia followed him closely, leaving Shui Rulan and Qianghua behind. As soon as she entered the courtyard, Qin Wanru saw several people in the courtyard. It turned out to be two women and a man. Several people were standing in the corridor. Seeing Qin Wanru coming in, they didn't recognize her for a moment. However, after Shui Rulan entered the door, the first woman immediately screamed, Shui Rulan, how dare you come here? Shui Rulan's face turned pale. She stopped and didn't go forward. She didn't go forward, but that woman didn't intend to let her go. She rushed over from the corridor, pointed at Shui Rulan and scolded, Shui Rulan, you bitch. You've only been back for a short time, but you can't stand the loneliness anymore. You've hooked up with General Qin and even persuaded him to marry you as his second wife. Look at your own identity, how dare you to be his second wife? Before the woman finished her words, her face was slapped hard. Immediately, a trace of hatred appeared on her face. She angrily turned to Yu Jie, who slapped her and wanted to scold her. However, Yu Jie kicked her ankles. She immediately lost her balance and knelt down with a thud. Where did this little bitch come from? Obviously, this woman was not a person who was willing to suffer losses. Being tormented by Yu Jie, she became more and more noisy. She looked at Qin Wanru beside Yu Jie and scolded loudly. Slap yourself. Qin Wanru said lightly. Yu Jie stretched out her hand and gave him another 2 hard slaps. Little bitch, you. The woman still refused to stop. Slap again. Yu Jie gave her another 4 slaps. These 4 slaps were so powerful that the corners of the woman's mouth immediately overflowed with blood. However, the force was not small. She opened her mouth and wanted to scold again. However, when she saw Qin Wanru's extremely cold eyes, she shivered and looked frightened. Who are you? The woman stared at Qin Wanru in shock and fear. This is the second miss of our general's mansion. Yujie stepped forward, separated the woman's eyes, and said coldly. Second miss, we were caught by Shui Rulan. She was afraid that we would expose her true colors, so she imprisoned us here. Second miss, please save us. The other woman seemed to be smart. Hearing Yujie's words, she rushed over and knelt down in front of Qin Wanru with a thud. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the two women in front of her. The previous one looked ordinary, about 30 years old, while the current one looked about 20 years old. She looked delicate, but there was a sense of seduction in her behavior. She did not look like a woman from a good family. Who are you? Qin Wanru frowned and asked. I'm her sister-in-law. When I was at home, I also took good care of her. I didn't expect that she would treat me like this now that she is rich. The ordinary-looking woman said loudly and looked at Shui Rulan fiercely. This had nothing to do with the so-called good. Who are you? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the woman in front of her. I am. Being glanced at by Qin Wanru's cold eyes, the delicate woman was a little flustered and looked at the previous woman. This is Shui Rulan's ex-husband's concubine. She had been with Shui Rulan before she married. The ordinary-looking woman said loudly. Slap her. Qin Wanru said coldly. Yujie reached out and gave the woman 2 slaps. Mother, who is this? Qin Wanru took a step back and looked at Shui Rulan. Shui Rulan was silent for a moment and then said, Mrs. Lu and concubine Lu. Sisters? Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it on her face. They are cousins. Shui Rulan nodded, with her eyes drifting. Why did you slap me? Mrs. Lu was slapped again and again. She was angry and wanted to rush over, but was blocked by Yujie. She could only protest loudly and angrily. Where is this place? Qin Wanru said coldly. Ningyuan Army General's mansion, so what? That was also a place where the law should be followed. Ningyuan Army General and Shui Rulan had hooked up early and even became a couple. How could they do that? After she married into our family, no one said that Shui Rulan could remarry. Mrs. Lu straightened her neck and said. It was obvious that she used to be arrogant in her family. No wonder Shui Rulan had to come back in the end. With such a sister-in-law, no one could stay here. Since you know it is Ningyuan Army General's mansion, you still dare to slander my father. Do you want to die? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and said coldly. Although concubine Lu seemed to be cunning, she was timid. Being scared by Qin Wanru, she immediately shivered. The capital city is a place of law. Ningyuan Army General's mansion can't cover the sky with one hand. If we really dare to do anything, someone will seek justice for us. Mrs. Lu was scared by Qin Wanru and looked a little nervous, but she still clenched her teeth and refused to let go. Someone will seek justice for you. The capital city is far away from Jiangzhou. Without relatives and acquaintances, who will seek justice for you? Even if you die here, who will know? Many people die in the capital city every day. Have you seen any mansion being sued? Qin Wanru smiled gloomily. Her delicate and beautiful eyebrows immediately made people feel a kind of heart-palpitating cruelty. Mrs. Lu, who was like a shrew, was also scared. She only felt that although the second miss in front of her was young, she inexplicably had a bit of cold majesty and momentum, and even her legs were a little soft. Tell me, who asked you to come here? Qin Wanru said. No one asked us to come here. We came here on our own. We happened to see Shui Rulan. She actually dared to marry again. We are going to build a chastity memorial arch for her. After coming to her senses, Mrs. Lu secretly scolded herself for not living up to expectations. She was actually scared by a little girl. She immediately raised her head and stared at Qin Wanru in front of her, and said loudly. Shui Rulan's face changed dramatically, and her body involuntarily trembled. If this memorial arch was really built, it would be a big matter. Nonsense. When did it happen? Shui Rulan couldn't help saying angrily. When did it happen? Let me think about it. It happened when you left Jiangzhou. What do you think, Shui Rulan? You didn't expect that we would build a memorial arch for you, right? Seeing Shui Rulan panic, Mrs. Lu became complacent and more confident. I am not in your place anymore. Why do you want to build a memorial arch? Originally, when I returned home, I said that I was free to marry. But didn't you also take the money from Qin's mansion? Shui Rulan was angry and her face turned pale. When she was taken home by Madame Dowager, the other party did say so. The reason why they let her go so quickly was naturally that Qin Huayong used the money to make them agree. Who can testify? Mrs. Lu said shamelessly. Shui Rulan was so angry that her hands also trembled. At that time, it was Nanny Duan who was sent by Madame Dowager to give the money, and the money was directly handed over to Mrs. Lu. How could this kind of thing be heard by others? There would be no witness, and even no contract was left. That was to say, it was fine as long as the other party agreed to let her go. Unexpectedly, now it turned out to be a countercharge. Seeing that Shui Rulan was so angry that she couldn't even say a word, Mrs. Lu became more complacent and more confident. She felt that she had grasped Shui Rulan's weak point. Shui Rulan, now you eat good food and wear good clothes. It seems that you are even pregnant. Don't you think that you are a widow? If a widow remarries, we have to agree, right? We don't even know that you remarry, and we are preparing to build a chastity memorial arch for you. There are old maids doing rough work in the backyard. Call 2 of them here. Seeing that Shui Rulan was so angry that she couldn't say a word, Qin Wanru said to Yu Jie and glanced at her leisurely with her watery eyes. Miss, there are many old maids doing rough work in the backyard. Why do you call 2 of them here? Yu Jie immediately understood, nodded, and pretended to be at a loss. Qin Wanru took out a handkerchief to wipe her hands slowly and said, just beat these people to death, so that madam won't be upset. The capital city is so big, and no one will know that these people died in our backyard. Her voice sounded soft, but the meaning behind the words was extremely bloody. Even because it was said by the petite miss in front of her, it made people feel more and more chilled. Concubine Lu was so scared that she knelt on the ground and trembled all over. How dare you? Mrs. Lu was so anxious that she ignored Shui Rulan and looked at Qin Wanru anxiously and said loudly. Why don't I dare? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and said calmly. Aren't you afraid that some of us will expose Shui Rulan? Even if we die, we will let Shui Rulan die with us. Mrs. Lu said fiercely. This is under the rule of the emperor. Even if 100 people like you die, Mother will not be implicated. It is not so easy to enter the mansion. Father asked the guards to keep an eye on you because he wants to kill you. Only I thought that you might not want to die, so I accompanied Mother to come here. But now it seems that you are courting death, so forget it. Qin Wanru said more and more scornfully, glanced at the 2 women, and then looked at the man who was still in the corridor at this time. This man should be the elder brother of Shui Rulan's ex-husband. A couple with a dead brother's concubine. It was very strange. Yu Jie, find someone to beat these 3 people to death and report that they intended to murder my father. Didn't the mansion punish several assassins in this name before? Qin Wanru said coldly with a cold look in her eyes. After that, she turned around and was about to leave. Chapter 258. Yes, miss. Yu Jie turned around neatly and walked out without hesitation. Not only the faces of the 2 women surnamed Lu changed greatly, but also the man in the corridor. He rushed to Qin Wanru and bowed respectfully. Miss, please wait. We don't mean to hurt Madame Shui. You don't mean that? Qin Wanru's eyes were cold. Yu Jie stopped and stood in front of her to protect her. Indeed, we don't mean that. We just came to the capital city for something, but I don't know how to attract the attention of Ningyuan Army General. The man braced himself to explain, and he dared not look down on the young second miss in front of him. Qin Wanru looked at the man again. At first glance, he looked like a well-educated scholar, but judging from his behavior just now, he was a very shrewd person. He should be the elder brother of the second young master of Qian's mansion, whom Shui Ruolin married. Since you don't mean that, what did your wife mean? Did she provoke our general's mansion? Qin Wanru said lightly. My wife is just a country woman, and she doesn't know some etiquette. When we were in the mansion, she always didn't get along with second sister-in-law, so she said these stupid words. I hope second miss can forgive her. The first young master Qian looked like a scholar, and his words were also gentle, which made people feel good. He even made people feel that he knew when to advance and when to retreat. My wife is ignorant, and I will teach her when we go back. I hope second miss can tell the general that we will choose a day to go back to our hometown after leaving the mansion, and we will not cause any other trouble for second sister-in-law. You are going back to your hometown? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows slightly. Yes, we are going back to our hometown. We have been in the capital city for so long, and we have to go back eventually. We can't stay in the capital city all the time. The first young master Qian sighed and said, My mother is still waiting at home, and my second brother is not here. How can I, the only son, not go back all the time? I will go back after the exam. When I came to the capital city, I guessed that I might meet second sister-in-law, so I specially left a letter at home for my mother. What he said was not just soft words. He used both carrot and stick, implying that if the Qin's mansion insisted on keeping them here, they would leave evidence in Jiangzhou. Their parents, who had lost their two sons, would definitely try their best to find out the truth for them. You are going to the capital, for the imperial examination? Qin Wanru suddenly said in an unclear manner. The peaceful smile on the first young master Qian's face froze. He just mentioned it casually, but it was caught by Qin Wanru keenly. He dared not to look down on Qin Wanru anymore. He said seriously, I came to the capital city for the imperial examination. Since he is going to the capital for the imperial examination, it is not time yet. He should stay in the capital for a while. Qin Wanru thought of something and her smile became more elegant. An examinee who participated in the imperial examination was not someone without any scholarly honors. His status was much higher than that of an ordinary commoner. If something really happened to him in the Qin manor, this matter would not be clear. Even Qin Huayong would be blamed. Hide in a place for the time being and study peacefully. I will not be involved in the affairs of the Qin's mansion. The first young master Qian seemed to be a smart person. He immediately understood the meaning of Qin Wanru's words and promised. Hide in a place for the time being and study peacefully. I don't think your wife thinks so. She is bent on finding trouble with my mother, and she will not stop until she is dead. Qin Wanru turned to look at the lady surnamed Lu who was still kneeling on the ground and said coldly. Hearing that she was mentioned, the lady surnamed Lu opened her mouth and wanted to say something. However, the first young master Qian glared at her fiercely. She immediately lowered her head. Although she was very angry, she did not dare to say anything. Although the lady surnamed Lu often made a scene in her mansion, if the first young master Qian was really angry, she did not dare to act recklessly. My wife is not sensible. I promise that this kind of thing will not happen in the future. I will not let my wife go out at will or talk at will. The first young master Qian withdrew his gaze and said. Qin Wanru glanced at the lady surnamed Lu coldly and then looked at concubine Lu who was more delicate at this time. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth and said, since the first young master Qian came to the capital for the imperial examination, it is normal to take care of his wife and concubine. But why did you bring your brother's concubine to the capital? Concubine Lu was also kneeling. Different from the shrewdness of the lady surnamed Lu, she looked pitiful and charming. Even if her hair was messy because of what happened just now, she looked more delicate. At this time, one of the buttons at the collar of her clothes was loosened, revealing the snow-white skin inside. Seeing Qin Wanru look at her, she subconsciously leaned toward the feet of the first young master Qian. My wife is lonely in the capital alone, so she specially takes her cousin's sister with her. In the capital, she also has a person to talk to, the first young master Qian said. He looked very calm, but the corner of his eyes slightly twitched. Qin Wanru's eyes quietly moved from the first young master Qian to concubine Lu, and finally from concubine Lu to the first young master Qian. A trace of serenity flashed in her watery eyes. The serenity seemed to penetrate people's hearts, making concubine Lu, who was kneeling on the ground, more and more nervous. She moved her body slightly and got closer to the first young master Qian. It turns out to be like this. If it is really like this, it is a pity. Qin Wanru said meaningfully. I don't know what you mean, second Miss Qin. The first young master Qian asked politely. Your brother has died, and the legal wife remarries, but it is not so easy for a concubine to remarry. But in some families, concubines can be given to each other. The first young master Qian came to the capital for the imperial examination, so he doesn't know many people. Since he brings this concubine to the capital, I am afraid that he has other ideas. Qin Wanru looked at concubine Lu more and more. These glances made concubine Lu panic and turn pale with fright. She turned to look at the first young master Qian with a pale face and trembling all over. She looked at the first young master Qian pitifully and said in a sweet voice, First young master. This voice was extremely gentle and moving in the ears of men, but in the ears of women, it was a little too artificial. The lady surnamed Lu, who was kneeling beside her, looked at concubine Lu confusedly, and all her attention fell on concubine Lu. Second Miss Qin, you think too much. She is my second brother's concubine. How could I do such a thing? The first young master Qian only felt that his scalp was a little numb. The reputation of the second Miss Qin was actually not prominent in Jiangzhou at that time, but the two families were related, so he knew a little that the second Miss Qin was just a naive miss who didn't understand the affairs of the world. But was the second Miss Qin really just a miss from an aristocratic family who didn't know anything? Why did she give him a feeling of great pressure? These words pierced his heart, and he almost couldn't respond for a while. He had long thought about answering General Qin's words, but he never thought that he would be stumped by a delicate miss from an aristocratic family. It seemed that the secrets in his heart were revealed little by little, and there was a faint cold sweat on his back. This is actually nothing in the capital city. Qin Wanru keenly sensed the stiffness of the first young master Qian, and a meaningful smile appeared on her lips. Seeing this smile, concubine Lu felt that it was more and more true. She looked at the first young master Qian with her red eyes pitifully, and her beautiful face was full of begging. She moved her hands a little, as if she wanted to hold the legs of the first young master Qian, but immediately came to her senses and hurriedly put down her hands. But even so, one of her hands had touched the robe of the first young master Qian. On the side, the lady surnamed Lu raised her eyebrows. She looked at the face of the first young master Qian and then looked at concubine Lu, and suddenly became furious. She suddenly turned to concubine Lu and reached out to slap her hard. This slap was so powerful that concubine Lu's body leaned to one side and hit the legs of the first young master Qian. At this time, she couldn't care about anything else. She hugged the legs of the first young master Qian and cried sadly. What are you doing? The first young master Qian looked at the lady surnamed Lu unhappily. What did I do? What did you do? Well, Qian Yukai, you are such a person. You. The lady surnamed Lu looked back and forth between the first young master Qian and concubine Lu, and reached out to point at them. She was so angry that she couldn't even say a word. Well, shut up. This is Ningyuan Army General's mansion. If you don't want to die, shut up. The first young master Qian shouted with a gloomy face. Since you have something to do, let's talk about it next time. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and turned around indifferently. Shui Rulan looked at these people and also turned around with Qin Wanru. They retreated to the outside of the room. The guards made way for them and closed the door again. At this time, the courtyard seemed to be in a mess. There seemed to be a slap and then a woman's cry. Such a coquettish cry was obviously not made by the aggressive lady surnamed Lu, and then there was a man's rebuke. Wanru, this is. Shui Rulan looked at the courtyard and frowned. Mother, let father handle this matter. Tell father about what happened today. I believe that father will be able to handle the rest of the matter better. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said. Wanru, you shouldn't intervene in this matter. Shui Rulan disagreed. Mother, I just guessed it. Originally, I just came to see what kind of people they are and why they want to deal with you. Grandma said that when you left, the people of Qian's mansion had already said that you can marry at will. How could they say so many words? I didn't expect to see this kind of thing. Qin Wanru smiled sweetly. Well, don't mention this matter in the future. You are a lady from an aristocratic family, and you can't see this kind of thing. Shui Rulan's face darkened, and she scolded Qin Wanru. She didn't like to let Qin Wanru see this kind of thing. As a big brother and his dead brother's concubine, this was originally a kind of scandal. Yes, mother, I won't do it in the future. Qin Wanru nodded obediently. Seeing that Qin Wanru was so obedient, Shui Rulan's eyes turned red. It's all my fault. I actually let you stand up for me. This kind of thing will dirty your eyes. Shui Rulan saw what had happened just now. Thinking that Qin Wanru, such a young girl, had seen such a dirty scandal because of her, Shui Rulan felt ashamed and deeply felt sorry for Qin Wanru. Originally, she just wanted to protect Qin Wanru, but now she had to let this child protect her. How could she not feel sad? Mother, I won't intervene in this matter. Mother, you can tell father yourself. Qin Wanru pulled Shui Rulan's hand and comforted her with a smile. A pair of bright watery eyes were enshrouded with layers of mist, coupled with delicate facial features, which made people feel more pity for her. Shui Rulan secretly made up her mind that she must not involve this child in this matter, and only said that she accidentally saw through this matter. Chapter 259. Shui Rulan also knew that this personal affair could even be said to be a key to control the first young Master Qian. The first young Master Qian wanted to take the imperial examination and become outstanding. At this time, he couldn't lose a little bit of reputation, and concubine Lu was a key to his reputation. With this handle in hand, the first young Master Qian would definitely not dare to deal with her again, no matter he had a secret agreement with someone or for other reasons. It was not appropriate for a person with an official rank like him to be imprisoned in the general's mansion. If something really happened, Qin Huayong would have to bear all the responsibilities. All the scholars in the world gathered in the capital city for the imperial examination. If something really happened, it would not be the first young Master Qian's fault. After thinking through these key points, Shui Rulan was more and more unwilling to get Qin Wanru involved in this mess caused by herself. After taking Qin Wanru out for a while, she said earnestly, Wanru, today you came here because of me. I took you to ask about the Qian's mansion, and I also found out what happened later. You don't know anything. Although Shui Rulan knew that this child was smart, she still told her. It would not be good to be involved in this kind of thing. Even if Qin Wanru was only present at that time, some rumors would be spread out, and it would not be good to say it. Shui Rulan tried her best to keep Qin Wanru out of it. Yes, mother, I will listen to you. Since the goal had been achieved, Qin Wanru would certainly listen to Shui Rulan, and she also knew that Shui Rulan really considered for her. Shui Rulan turned her head to look at the two servant girls behind them. They were both trusted subordinates, and they were close to each other just now, so they heard clearly the conversation between them. Seeing Shui Rulan turn back, the two servant girls hurriedly saluted and knowingly said, Madam, we will follow your orders. You go back first. Seeing that the two servant girls didn't need her to remind them, Shui Rulan nodded with satisfaction and looked at the intersection ahead. At the intersection ahead, there was a road to Qin Huayong's study outside, and the other road was back to the inner court. Yes, mother. Qin Wanru's eyes also fell on the intersection, and she answered softly. After saluting Shui Rulan, she took Yujie forward a few steps, but suddenly stopped and turned back. Her delicate little face slightly tightened, and she said seriously, "Mother, you are not alone now, you have me and my unborn brother or sister." Her words made Shui Rulan's heart tremble, her nose sour, and she almost shed tears. She bit her lip and nodded hard, but she could not say a word. She knew what Qin Wanru meant. Qin Wanru wanted her to be more careful and think more about herself when necessary. Even though she was originally weak, she was a mother who was tough and could put other things aside for the time being. Qin Wanru didn't need Shui Rulan to say anything. Seeing that Shui Rulan couldn't say anything for a while, Qin Wanru bowed sideways and turned to leave with Yujie. There were some things that she couldn't say, but she was afraid that Shui Rulan would be depressed like in her last life. The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. Therefore, he had long rung the alarm bell beside Shui Rulan. Looking at Qin Wanru's slender back, Shui Rulan's face became cold. After thinking for a while, she walked out of the study. As a mother, she had to be strong. Now she was a mother, and she could not shrink back at all. If she was always so weak, she would need Qin Wanru's weak shoulder to protect her. How could she bear to let such a thin and weak girl? Hearing that Shui Rulan had come over, Qin Huayong was stunned for a moment and hurriedly asked the manservant to invite her in. Shui Rulan rarely came to his study. She had only come once or twice since she moved into the mansion. After Shui Rulan came in and bowed to Qin Huayong, she went straight to the point and said, "Cousin, how do you want to deal with those people in the backyard? Let's leave it for now and see how it goes." Qin Huayong reached out and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. There were too many things to deal with recently, so he had to put those that needed to be dealt with first. How did these people come to the capital? If it was in the past, Shui Rulan would not stop talking when she saw how tired Qin Huayong was. But at this moment, she acted as if she did not see it and continued to ask softly. It should be a coincidence that they came to the capital for the imperial examination. It's not a big deal. Qian Yukai did not dare to do more for his imperial examination. Qin Huayong had investigated it before and felt that it was not a big deal. He would lock them up first. There were too many things to deal with recently. If it was not important, he would put it off. What if it's his wife, the lady surnamed Lu, who wants to make trouble? Shui Rulan looked at Qin Huayong and smiled bitterly. "Cousin, it's my fault for getting you into trouble. When we were in Jiangzhou, the lady surnamed Lu was a shrewd person who never wanted to suffer losses. She was the kind of person who was unwilling to suffer any losses even if she made trouble. She might not necessarily take the overall situation into consideration. According to today's situation, the lady surnamed Lu was obviously going to make trouble. The lady surnamed Lu naturally knew Madame D when they were in Jiangzhou. If she wanted to deal with her, it was the best to start with the lady surnamed Lu. Shui Rulan did not know nothing about some things. The lady surnamed Lu was just a woman and a child. Even if she really made trouble, the first young master Qian would not be involved in the end. He only needed to say that she was an ignorant woman and a child to clear up all the things. It would not have a big impact on his imperial examination. "Rulan, don't worry. I won't let it happen. The lady surnamed Lu is Qian Yotsai's wife. If his wife talked nonsense, he would not end well." Seeing Shui Rulan's bitter smile, Qin Huayong comforted her. In fact, this was also his real thought. He felt that the lady surnamed Lu and Qian Yukai would not really make trouble. With the imperial examination ahead of Qian Yukai would certainly manage the lady surnamed Lu well. "Cousin, what if Qian Yukai does not even want his wife?" Shui Rulan asked. "What?" Qin Huayong felt that he did not understand Shui Rulan's meaning and asked in surprise. Just now I went to the yard over there and saw the first young master Qian, the lady surnamed Lu, and concubine Lu. There is obviously something between the first young master Qian and concubine Lu, and the lady surnamed Lu has long been out of the first young master Qian's heart. Shui Rulan thought for a moment and still said what she had seen just now. Of course, the most important person, Qin Wanru, was hidden by her. She put all the blame on herself. You mean Qian Yukai wants to make trouble and then divorce his wife? Qin Huayong's eyes became strange. The lady surnamed Lu is shrewd and sometimes makes trouble shamelessly. She dares to say anything and do anything. Qian Yukai has not liked her for a long time. In the past, when they were in the mansion, they also made a little trouble every 3 days and a big trouble every 5 days. If Qian Yukai is given a chance to not only end well but also get rid of the lady surnamed Lu, I believe he will be very happy to do so. Shui Rulan analyzed calmly. On the way here, she had already thought about how to say it. She had seen some things in her eyes, but she did not say it just because she did not need to, not because she was not smart. At this time, she was afraid of getting Qin Wanru involved and being plotted against. So she just said what she thought. You mean that Qian Yukai connived the lady surnamed Lu to make trouble and tell the truth about you? Then he divorced the lady surnamed Lu on the grounds that she was shrewd and rude and married a lady from a noble family? Qin Huayong understood and his face darkened. If this was the case, he really looked down on Qian Yukai. This approach was very beneficial to Qian Yukai. On the one hand, he could get rid of the lady surnamed Lu. On the other hand, he could refute his reputation. If he passed the imperial examination this time, he could marry another lady justifiably. As for the secret benefits, it should be not small. If there was no financial transaction, Qin Huayong would not believe it. With Madame D's temperament, there must be a large amount of money involved. At that time, the letters seized at that time were written with the names of these people. At first, Qin Huayong did not understand who they were. Later, Qin Wanru's unintentional words reminded him that Shui Rulan had married Madame Qian before. In fact, Madame D did not write the name of Qian Yukai in the letter. She only wrote the first young master Qian, the lady surnamed Lu and concubine Lu, so he did not remember for a while. After being reminded by Qin Wanru, he immediately remembered it was Qian Yukai. Later, he sent someone to secretly invite the 3 of them into Qin's mansion. At that time, he only thought that Madame D wanted to plot against Shui Rulan with Qian Yukai. After all, they had not done it yet. He did not expect that the agreement should have been made long ago. At that time, Madame D should have asked Madame of Duke Xing to pass a message to let these people make a big deal about Shui Rulan and ruin Shui Rulan's reputation. Qin Huayong had thought that Qian Yukai would not really do this for his imperial examination. He did not expect that Qian Yukai had this idea early and wanted to divorce his wife with this matter. Since he and the lady surnamed Lu were not on good terms, he could not take the lady surnamed Lu to the capital city this time. Therefore, this matter should have been settled before Qian Yukai came to the capital city. Unexpectedly, Madame D had been plotting against him early. Qin Huayong's face suddenly darkened. He slapped the table so hard that the teacups on the table jumped up. Madame D was really hateful. I know. I will deal with it later. You go back first. Qin Huayong suppressed the anger in his heart and said coldly. Shui Rulan grew up with Qin Huayong. How could she not know that he was extremely hateful at this time? She stood up, nodded and said softly, Cousin, then I will go back first. Go back first and have a good rest. I will deal with this matter. I will not let you get hurt. Qin Huayong looked at her clumsy body with a little guilt and said. He did not consider this matter thoroughly. He did not expect that Qian Yukai would have this idea. He thought that they were husband and wife and would not really do such a thing. He did not expect that Qian Yukai had the idea of marrying another woman before he came to the capital city. It was so hateful. Yes, cousin. I will be careful. I think concubine Lu and Qian Yukai seem to have some Shui rule and hesitated and reminded him again. I know. Qin Huayong immediately understood that the lady surnamed Lu planned to divorce. Concubine Lu looked more youthful and beautiful. She planned to take her as a concubine. But now the lady surnamed Lu was still here and did not dare to do so openly. But there must be a beginning and an end between them in private. He did not think about this before. He did not think about it for a while. Now that he thought about it carefully, he found that it was indeed a long time ago. Chapter 260. Qin Huayong didn't stay in Qian Yotsai's yard for a long time. Then he ordered someone to send Qian Yukai and concubine Lu out, leaving the lady surnamed Lu to stay in the mansion. He said that it was Qian Yotsai's idea. Recently, he had to study hard and prepare for the imperial examination, so he had no time to consider other things and take care of his family. He said that concubine Lu was a maid who took care of his daily life, and the lady surnamed Lu was sent to Qin's mansion by him. At that time, Qian Yukai didn't make it widely known that he entered the mansion. Many people didn't know who he was, and they didn't know that concubine Lu was not a maid but a concubine of his second brother. Therefore, this reason was really reasonable, and everyone believed it. Since it was Qian Yotsai's idea and Qin's mansion was willing to help, it was reasonable for the lady surnamed Lu to stay in Qin's mansion. This kind of thing was also a family matter and had nothing to do with others. After leaving the mansion, Qian Yukai returned to his rented yard with a gloomy face. After thinking for a while, he asked the supervisor who stayed in the yard to rent another yard nearby and asked concubine Lu to move there. After this matter was settled, a person came to visit him in the yard. They didn't talk for a long time, and Qian Yukai sent him out. Both of them didn't look very good. It was obvious that they didn't agree with each other. Then the person got on the carriage at the back door. The carriage went all the way back and entered from the back door of Duke Xing's mansion. When the news that Qian Yukai left Qin's mansion with concubine Lu was spread to Qin Wanru, she was carefully checking the Tang Qianyan under the window. It seemed that because of the water and soil, this pot of Tang Qianyan, which had been dull after arriving in the capital, became energetic, but only a little energetic. As for the flower bud, there was no flower bud. According to different species, Tang Qianyan generally bloomed in autumn and winter. However, this pot in Qin Wanru's hand had never produced a flower bud through autumn and winter. It was said that the water and soil were not suitable for it in Jiangzhou, but it was still the same in the capital, which really made Qin Wanru feel helpless. However, this pot of flower was asked by Chu Luqin to raise. If she didn't raise it well, he might not stop when he remembered it. Qin Wanru was also helpless about this. Miss, why did the general send the first young master Qian and concubine Lu away and leave the lady surnamed Lu alone? Qin Yu asked confusedly after reporting the matter. She took the small watering pot from Qin Wanru's hand and carefully watered the flowers for her. Qin Wanru washed her hands in the basin brought by the little servant girl, and then picked up a handkerchief to wipe her hands. Then she said slowly, with the lady surnamed Lu in our hands, Qian Yukai can't do anything even if he wants to. After all, the lady surnamed Lu has not reached the condition of being divorced. So now with the lady surnamed Lu in our hands, we can still deter Qian Yukai. Then why did you let concubine Lu out? Qin Yu put down the small watering can and asked when she saw that the water was almost used up. It was unjustifiable for concubine Lu to live with the first young master Qian. Even if there were other servants to serve them, they could be regarded as a man and a woman living alone together. Moreover, she was the concubine of his dead brother. It was very attractive for them to live together. Qian Yukai is a smart man. He won't let concubine Lu live with him. He still needs to take the imperial examination. At this time, he can't ruin his reputation. But concubine Lu, I'm afraid she doesn't think so. She is just a concubine whose husband is dead. What will happen to her in the future depends on Qian Yotsai's words. If Qian Yukai really gives her away, what can she do? Qin Wanru said slowly, with a sneer on her lips. It should be Qian Yukai who had a real deal with Madame D. On the surface, it was the lady surnamed Lu. If the lady surnamed Lu made a big deal out of it, Shui Rulan's reputation would be ruined and she would suffer a loss. Then Qian Yukai could divorce his wife because of this. Others would even think that he was wronged and the lady surnamed Lu was a shrew. Who could be blamed for her ending like this? At that time, Shui Rulan's reputation would be ruined, the lady surnamed Lu would be divorced, and the money given by Madame D would fall into Qian Yotsai's hands. It could be said that it was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Now that the matter was found out by her father, who had always been decisive and cruel, he directly kept the lady surnamed Lu but sent concubine Lu to Qian Yukai. He wanted to control the matter between concubine Lu and Qian Yukai, forcing Qian Yukai not to dare to say anything against the Qin's mansion. Since concubine Lu went out with Qian Yukai, even if Qian Yukai wanted to avoid arousing suspicion with her, concubine Lu, who was afraid that she would have no one to rely on in the future, had to cling tightly to Qian Yukai. Originally, there was an ambiguous relationship between them. Even if Qian Yukai expressed to avoid arousing suspicion at this time, it was probably impossible. Miss, if the general doesn't release first young Master Qian, what will happen? Yujia asked, paying attention to another aspect. Madame of Duke Xing must have already found him. If my father doesn't release him, I'm afraid that another trouble will come to us. After all, Qian Yukai is an examinee. Although his status is not prominent, there are a large number of examinees in the capital city. If he dies out of sympathy, it may lead to a big trouble. Qin Wanru said with her long eyelashes hanging down, covering the deepness in her eyes. Scholars had always been a group, and it was the group that was most likely to become officials. If they were really instigated by others, the small Qin's mansion might not be able to resist. Madame of Duke Xing not only wanted her life, but also wanted to destroy the whole Qin's mansion. She wanted to destroy herself from the root. The hatred was deep, but it also made Qin Wanru feel that her guess was correct, but she couldn't find the evidence. However, since Madame D's letter and Qin Yuru's map were found on the old maid beside her, Madame Dowager and Qin Huayong could no longer believe that Madame of Duke Xing was kind to the Qin's mansion. No matter how hypocritically Madame of Duke Xing showed kindness, Qin Wanru didn't have to worry that Madame Dowager and her father would agree with her relationship with Madame of Duke Xing. When the 2 servant girls heard Qin Wanru's words, their faces changed greatly. They didn't have much experience, but if all the officials of the imperial examination in the capital city knew about it, it would be difficult. Even the first-class officials in the capital city had to avoid the sharp edge temporarily when facing this kind of thing, not to mention that the foundation of Qin's mansion was not stable and its rank was not high. Madame D is so vicious. She wants to destroy the whole Qin's mansion. Yujia murmured. She doesn't want to. She is just used by others. She thinks she just wants to deal with my mother. Qin Wanru sneered. Madame D was vicious and short-sighted, so she became a sharp arrow in the hands of Madame of Duke Xing. Then why doesn't General go to Madame D? Qin Yu asked confusedly. My father has been so disappointed with her that he doesn't know what to say. But because of Duke Yong's mansion, he can't really do anything to her, so he simply locks her up and doesn't come out. Qin Wanru analyzed lightly. She really doesn't come out. That's great. Yujia was a little dissatisfied at first, but she suddenly became happy after thinking about it. If Madame D was not a demon in the mansion would be much more peaceful. Although the first miss would also make some trouble, she was not as good as Madame D. Moreover, first miss could not protect herself now and had been grounded. Second miss, someone from Duke Yong's mansion asks to see you. When the 3 of them were talking, a servant girl's voice suddenly came from the yard to report. Qin Wanru frowned and didn't know why Duke Yong's mansion sent someone to see her at this time. She nodded slightly, sat down on the chair in the middle, picked up the tea and took a sip, and then put it down. Yujia stood behind Qin Wanru, and Qin Yu lifted the curtain. Looking at a strange old maid and 2 servant girls in the yard with their heads down, she said. Come in. The old maid came in with a smile and left the two servant girls outside the yard. She came in and bowed to Qin Wanru first, then smiled sincerely and said, "Second miss, I am an old maid from Duke Yong's mansion. I heard that our madam is sick. Old madam and madam are worried, so they specially sent two servant girls who know some medical skills to serve her. Madam D was locked up, so she couldn't really say that. Being sick was the best reason. Shouldn't you tell my father and mother about this?" Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and asked calmly. She really didn't understand what Duke Yong's mansion meant. "I've shown them to the general just now. The general thinks they are good, but he still wants to ask Madame Shui's opinion. I think it's not convenient for Madame Shui recently, so I came here to show them to Second Mississippi. If Second Miss thinks they are suitable, I'll send these two servant girls to Madame Shui." The old maid was good at talking. In a few words, she made an unreasonable thing reasonable. Since Qin Huayong had agreed, how could Qin Wanru, as his daughter, dare not to say no? Moreover, Duke Yong's mansion was so humble, which could really make people feel good. After thinking for a while, Qin Wanru said lightly, "What do I need to do?" "Second miss, you don't need to do anything. I've done what I should do. I just need to let Second Miss have a look and then tell our son-in-law." The old maid said with a smile on her face and was very kind. This attitude was quite different from when Duke Yong's mansion sent people to Qin's mansion for the first time in the capital city. Qin's mansion was in trouble, and Duke Yong's mansion was also in trouble. Qin Yuru had a bad reputation, so did Di Yen. No one dared to say anything about this marriage in the teeth of the storm. "I don't care about this. You'd better go to see my mother." Qin Wanru frowned. She couldn't care about what happened in Madame D's room. But Madame Shui's health. "I'm afraid that I will disturb her rest," the old maid of Duke Yong's mansion said awkwardly. Duke Yong's mansion naturally knew that Shui Rulan was pregnant. What she said was very reasonable. Everything was based on taking care of Shui Rulan. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the old maid's smiling face, which seemed to be very calm. Would people of Duke Yong's mansion treat Shui Rulan well? For this point, Qin Wanru absolutely didn't believe it. "But I can't care about this kind of thing. What should I do?" Qin Wanru withdrew her eyes and smiled slightly. She asked calmly, "If I tell my father after this, it will seem that I meddle in the affairs of my father and Madame D. How can I do such a thing as a daughter?" Even if she just told her father after this, it was not something that a daughter should do. Therefore, this matter was basically just a formality. As a madam of an aristocratic family, it was impossible that Countess Yong didn't know it. Chapter 261. The old maid's words were reasonable. Although Qin Wanru couldn't meddle in the affairs of Madame D's yard, she knew about it. She just needed to send someone to accompany her to Shui Rulan and tell her. Since she had seen it, Shui Rulan would record it, so Shui Rulan didn't need to worry about it. Qin Wanru could even directly instruct the supervisor of the inner court to deal with this matter, and then Qin Wanru could tell Shui Rulan that this matter would be handled by Shui Rulan. Qin's mansion and Duke Yong's mansion were close, and they were related by marriage. It was reasonable for Qin Wanru to do so. "You go by yourselves. You should know my mother." Qin Wanru didn't answer the old maid's question, but said after thinking for a while. When the masters of Qin's mansion didn't enter the mansion, the servants of Duke Yong's mansion also came to help from time to time, so they were familiar with some important courtyards. Seeing that no one led the way when the old maid came in, Qin Wanru knew that she knew the way. Will it be too troublesome for Madame Shui? Seeing Qin Wanru refuse, the old maid became uneasy, and the smile on her face was much less. My mother is in charge of this matter. There is nothing wrong with it. Qin Wanru blinked her eyes and said unhurriedly. This is our aunt. I'm afraid that Madame Shui will have a grudge. The old maid looked at Qin Wanru eagerly and said. Of course, she hoped that Qin Wanru could take over this matter and let someone take them there. She just needed to report to Shui Rulan, and there was no need for Shui Rulan to see them often. Madame D and Shui Rulan were both Qin Huayong's wives, and the relationship between them was not so harmonious. As the servants of Duke Yong's mansion, it was reasonable for them to be afraid that Shui Rulan would embarrass them. This seemed even more reasonable. Qin Wanru suddenly showed a smile and looked at the old maid below with a faint smile. Where are the two servant girls? Bring them in and let me have a look. She didn't say that she didn't care about it, nor did she say that she must care about it. She just said such a sentence. Although the old maid was stunned for a moment, she immediately nodded and said, "Okay, I'll bring them in right away. I didn't come in just now because I was afraid that they would be rude and frighten." 2nd Mississippi, Duke Yong's mansion was also an aristocratic family, but the servant girls from Duke Yong's mansion were afraid that they would break the rules when they met outsiders, so they didn't allow them to greet them. This reason was really far-fetched. Although the old maid still looked calm and didn't hesitate to turn around and go out to call for help, this reason was not as reasonable as just now. Yujie took 2 steps forward and wanted to go out to have a look, but she saw Qin Wanru shake her head silently and stopped immediately. Qin Yu, who was standing at the door, was not so particular. She lifted the curtain and looked outside. The old maid said a few words to the 2 servant girls who lowered their heads. The 2 servant girls nodded and followed her. After entering the room, they first bowed to Qin Wanru respectfully, and then stood aside in a well-behaved manner, looking down at their noses and mouths in a well-behaved manner. His etiquette and upbringing were not bad. Ordinary servant girls couldn't afford such etiquette and upbringing. How could they say that they were afraid of not following the rules? The rules of Duke Yong's mansion were really strict. Raise your head. Qin Wanru's eyes flashed with a trace of sarcasm. Her eyes fell on the 2 well-behaved servant girls, and she said lightly, "Raise your head and let 2nd Miss see. From now on, 2nd Miss is your master." The old maid said to the 2 servant girls with a smile. The 2 servant girls answered and raised their heads together. Seeing the face of one of the 2 servant girls, Qin Wanru's smile deepened, but there was only coldness in her eyes, and only the coldness overflowed little by little. It turned out to be her. No wonder Duke Yong's mansion sent her to Qin Wanru first and let her take responsibility for this matter. They wanted to push the blame to Qin Wanru if anything happened in the future. The 2 servant girls were 16 or 17 years old. They were very beautiful, but not frivolous. They even had the feeling that they were from a good family. Although they raised their heads, they behaved themselves and didn't look around. The light green coats of the servant girls of Duke Yong's mansion made their faces as white as snow and their skin was crystal clear. These are the 2 servant girls that Duke Yong's mansion will give to Madame D. What can they do? Qin Wanru looked them up and down and said with a smile. Yes, they are given to Madame D by our mansion. These 2 servant girls can massage. Our madam is ill and can't move much. Let these 2 servant girls massage her for a while, which can relax her and prevent her from being sick all the time. Our old madam specially found these 2 servant girls and then trained them in etiquette. The old maid introduced them with a smile. Speaking of old madam of Duke Yong's mansion, she naturally used her to suppress Qin Wanru. Compared with Qin Wanru, she was a real elder. Qin Wanru certainly couldn't refuse the servant girls sent by her. Good massage. Can you help me massage a few times? I also have a headache recently. I don't know if it's because I came to the capital city. I don't accept it. Qin Wanru reached out to press her head and slightly closed her watery eyes. Okay, let one of them serve 2nd Miss first. The old maid repeatedly agreed. It seemed that she was not baffled by Qin Wanru's sudden difficulties at all. She nodded to a servant girl. The servant girl stepped forward and bowed to Qin Wanru. Then she turned to the back of Qin Wanru. Yujie leaned to the side, but did not step aside. The servant girl came over, reached out to press the acupoints on both sides of Qin Wanru's forehead, and gently rubbed them. Qin Wanru herself was good at acupuncture, so she immediately knew that this servant girl really had some skills. She just moved a little and pinched the acupoints very steadily and accurately. Her strength was also not small. At first glance, she knew that she really knew how to do it. Yujie's eyes also fell on the servant girl's hands. Yujie, who knew medical skills, could see clearly that this servant girl's hands were also very neat and skillful. She was really good. "Second miss, what do you think?" The old maid, who had been standing aside with a smile, asked with a smile at this time. "Not bad." Qin Wanru nodded, slowly opened her eyes, and waved her hand. The servant girl stepped back silently, and then went back to the previous position. She still stood there with her head down, which was very good. "Second miss, you mean?" The old maid said with a smile. "I mean, Nanny, you can go to my mother. As a daughter, I don't have to intervene in this kind of thing." Qin Wanru said with a faint smile. "But..." The old maid was stunned for a moment. She did not expect that after such a big trouble, Qin Wanru still did not agree to take over this matter. Then why did she do that just now? "I'm also tired here. You can leave." Qin Wanru leaned back, waved her hand, and directly asked them to leave. "But..." The old maid was anxious and wanted to say something, but was pushed out of the door by Yujie. The two servant girls left inside looked at each other, and then peeked at Qin Wanru in panic and hurried out. At the door, Yujie's face darkened. "This kind of thing is originally not our Mrs. business. If you think it is not appropriate, you can directly go to our Madame Dowager or Madame Shui. But didn't second miss deliberately test them just now?" The old maid had a chance to finish her words at this time. "Just now, second miss did want to help you, but now second miss is tired. You can go by yourself." Yujie waved her hand impatiently and said. He was clearly toying with them. The old maid's face turned blue with anger, but she also knew that this was not Duke Yong's mansion. She gritted her teeth, looked at the people around her, endured it, and helplessly left with the two servant girls. Qing Yu politely sent the old maid to the door, and then turned back to give a hint to Yujie. She followed the old maid. Just now, Qin Wanru had told her to see where the old maid was going next. Yujie turned back and returned to the room. She saw Qin Wanru sitting on the chair in a daze. "Miss?" Yujie called in a low voice. Qin Wanru seemed not to hear it, and her eyes still fell straight on a floor tile in front of her. There was a bit of coldness in her eyes, and her pink little face was gloomy without a trace of a smile. She seemed to be a completely different person from the softness and gentleness just now. "Miss?" Yujie said anxiously, afraid that something bad would happen to her. This time, Qin Wanru heard it. Her eyes were dark and deep. She slowly raised her head and looked at Yujie. "Has the old maid left?" "Yes," and Qin Yu followed her. "Miss, is there anything wrong with the old maid?" Yujie answered while peeking at Qin Wanru's expression. She found that although Qin Wanru's eyes were deep, her expression had returned to normal. She couldn't help but feel relieved. "It is very wrong. She is not an old maid, but a servant girl," Qin Wanru said with a sneer on her lips. She had seen the servant girl who stood there and looked well-behaved. In the last life, she was the servant girl sent by Duke Yong's mansion to Madame D, and then she was sent to Qin Huayong by Madame D. It was this servant girl who looked well-behaved and like a girl from a good family who took away Shui Rulan's favor, which made Qin Huayong treat Shui Rulan coldly. In the end, Shui Rulan died with 2 children. The main reason was this servant girl who colluded with Madame D. She seemed to be pure and kind, but she was cunning. Duke Yong's mansion specially sent her here to help Madame D deal with Shui Rulan and her, and this servant girl did do it. She would never forget the scene when this servant girl deliberately covered her stomach and fell backward, framing her for pushing her. At that time, Two rough old maids who were protecting her rushed over and pushed her away fiercely. She hit the corner of the pavilion, and her blood dyed the pillar beside her red. It was Shui Rulan who came over after hearing the news and hurriedly asked someone to save her. Otherwise, she would have died that time. Later, this servant girl actually made a false accusation, saying that Shui Rulan colluded with her to harm her child and deliberately plotted against her, and that it was just an accident that she almost died. Therefore, this matter was turned into a small matter, and then into nothing. In the end, nothing happened except that she lay in bed alone for half a year. Shui Rulan's health became worse because of this, and she was even more neglected by Qin Huayong. Later, she died with 2 children. Speaking of this servant girl pushed her a lot. Now, it seemed that it was a lifetime ago, but the scenes were still in front of her. The smile on her lips was no longer sarcastic, but cold. Very good, Duke Yong's mansion was unwilling to see Madame D fall, so they sent this woman here again. Chapter 262. Qin Wanru knew clearly what Duke Yong's mansion was planning when she saw the servant girl. Then she thought that they sent the servant girl to her place first and let her take over this matter after checking it was to send the servant girl to Qin Huayong as a foreshadowing. In the future, this servant girl would inevitably harm her grandmother, mother, and herself. At that time, others would only laugh at her for what she had done. They might also say that this servant girl was originally sent to her father's side by her. If anything happened, she would be blamed on her and it had nothing to do with Duke Yong's mansion or Madame D. Her heart was indeed vicious. Miss, what should we do? This servant girl will be sent to Madame D. Yu Jie's face changed dramatically. Let them send her first. Since she is here, let's take things as they come. A faint smile appeared on Qin Wanru's red lips. She wanted to give him a taste of his own medicine. A man from a good family who knew the rules and manners was much better than a woman who lost her reputation and was still arrogant and domineering. In this life, from the root, she was no longer the timid girl, and Shui Rulan was no longer a concubine who could only helplessly protect her. A concubine and a concubine fought for favor, and the favored one won. But a wife and a concubine fought for favor, and it was not certain who would win. Moreover, she had a better countermeasure here. The old maid came out of Qin Wanru's courtyard and helplessly looked at Jifang Pavilion. She also knew that she couldn't go back. This second Miss Qin was stubborn, and she did whatever she wanted and did whatever she wanted. Fortunately, Madame also expected this situation and told her to go directly to Madame Shui if there was no other way and enter Qin's mansion according to the rules. With the 2 servant girls, the old maid went to Shui Rulan's Lufeng courtyard. As expected, she was stopped at the door again. After asking carefully for a while, she was allowed to go in. As for the 2 servant girls, they still stayed outside the door. After asking about the situation, Shui Rulan asked the supervisor to register them. One was called Huang Rui, and the other was called Hong Ye. They were sent to Madame D to take care of her. Since Duke Yong's mansion didn't say anything about the rumor that Madame D was ill, everyone took it as true. It was not a big deal to send 2 servant girls here. Given Madame D's current situation, it was almost impossible for her to make a comeback. Shui Rulan didn't need to spend any more energy to deal with her, but Duke Yong's mansion still needed to maintain politeness on the surface. In this regard, Duke Yong's mansion and Qin's mansion now had the same goal. In this case, Shui Rulan did not make things difficult for the old maid of Duke Yong's mansion. After writing down the names of the 2 servant girls, she let them go. After that, the old maid took the 2 servant girls to see Madame D. Because Qin Huayong had sent someone to tell her before, the old maid easily took the 2 servant girls into Madame D's Yulan pavilion. Hearing that they were from Duke Yong's mansion, Nanny Zhou went to the door to welcome them. After leaving the 2 servant girls outside, the old maid followed Nanny Zhou into the room. After pushing the door open and entering, the room was filled with thick gloom, as if the window hadn't been opened for a long time. It made people feel stuffy, as if there was a disgusting smell in it, which was very nauseating. Although the old maid felt uncomfortable, she didn't dare to show it on her face. When they entered the inner room, they saw Madame D lying on the bed, leaning against the wall. The old maid was shocked. She hadn't seen her for a long time, but Madame D's face was sallow and she seemed to be terminally ill. Was she really sick? Madam, are you really sick? The old maid said in shock. Sick? If I stay in this place for a long time, I will get sick even if I don't. Madame D's face was very gloomy. The curtains of the window were almost all drawn down. There was not a trace of wind coming in, and even the light was half gray. Madame D's face seemed to be covered with a layer of ash, without a trace of vitality. Only a pair of gloomy eyes showed a kind of heart-palpitating coldness under the dim light. Old Madame asked me to find a way to see you, and also sent you 2 servant girls to take care of you. Old Madame asked you to rest assured that she would find a way to get you out. She asked you not to worry. As long as there is life, there is hope. The old maid comforted her, knowing that it was difficult for her to get rid of the knot in her heart at this time. If she stayed like this, she would really get sick. There are a lot of servants in my yard, but they can't get out. There are a lot of idle people. She asked my mother not to send them here. If she really misses me, she would find a way to let Qin Huayong out. Madame D's voice became sharp. If I stay in this courtyard, I will not only get sick, but also go crazy. As she said, she stretched out her hand from the quilt, pulled the corner of the quilt with her sharp nails, and sneered nervously. Okay. Don't worry, madam. Old Madam will find a way. Don't worry. The old maid didn't dare to disobey her and could only follow her words. After that, she looked at Nanny Zhou beside her, and Nanny Zhou nodded silently, indicating that she should talk to Madame D like this. Hearing the old maid's words, Madame D seemed to calm down a little. Although she still looked gloomy, she looked a little relaxed. Unexpectedly, she asked about the servant girls. Why did she send me 2 servant girls? My mother would not send 2 servant girls for no reason. These 2 servant girls are really not ordinary. They were specially sent to you. The old maid lowered her voice and said. What do you mean? Madame D rolled her eyes and asked. 2 servant girls. One of them is very good at massaging, so old Madame sent her to serve you and massage you. The other one is sent to the son-in-law. The old maid rolled her eyes and said meaningfully. Sent to Qin Huayong? Are there not enough servants serving him now? Why did they send to him? Madame D said with jealousy and hatred. These words reminded her of Shui Rulan, and she gritted her teeth for a moment. In her view, everything she had suffered in front of her was Shui Rulan's trick. Thinking of Shui Rulan, she wished that Shui Rulan could die in front of her now. Madam, old Madam said that the person serving the son-in-law now is not you, so why do you care how many servants he has now? This one was specially sent to me, and the contract of selling her is in your hands. Even if she becomes the son-in-law's servant, so what? She has to listen to you obediently, and she can also fight with Madame Shui. The old maid said in a sincere and heartfelt tone. Her words made Madame D silent for a while. She grabbed the quilt fiercely, and 2 lines were immediately scratched out of the exquisite embroidery on the quilt. Her face was gloomy. Seeing that Madame D still didn't let go, the old maid continued to persuade her, Madam, why don't you understand? As long as this servant girl is favored, your problem can be easily solved. As long as she is around the son-in-law, you can be released, can't you? And Madame Shui is pregnant. If the son-in-law ignores her at this time, do you think she will be so angry that she will have a miscarriage? Abort the child in her belly. Madame D didn't speak for a long time, and then said with a sneer. Yes, we have to find a way to make her unable to give birth to the child, or when she gives birth, both of them will die. Think about it, if she is upset at this time and finds out that the son-in-law is good to other women, will she be in a bad mood and annoyed? At that time, we can play some tricks, and this child will definitely not be born. The old maid said with a smile. Madame D liked to hear these words. She leaned back and didn't have the neurotic coldness just now, but looked a little ferocious. I want the lives of the two bitches, Shui Rulan and Qin Wanru. Of course, I will listen to everything you say. But now things have not succeeded, and I still need to bear with it. I must not let the other side find out the plot of the young lady and old madam. After a period of time, when Madame Shui falls out of favor or miscarriage, of course, it's best to die with both of them. The Qin's mansion will be my world again. As for the second miss, without Madame Shui, everything depends on you. The old maid said. Madame D showed a little complacent smile on her face. Of course, the ending in this sentence was what she liked most. But then she stopped smiling and said, Mother, how can you be sure that the girl will definitely be liked by Qin Huayong? Do you want to have a look, madam? The old maid said with a smile. Madame D nodded. The old maid turned around and went out. After a while, she brought in a servant girl. When the servant girl came in, she respectfully bowed to Madame D, and then stood aside. She looked very decent and polite. After standing aside, she didn't look around. Daughter of a good family? Madame D looked up and down and asked. The old maid looked at the servant girl with a smile. The servant girl came forward and lowered her head to answer, Madam, I am not a daughter of a good family. I am a prostitute redeemed by old madam. The so-called prostitute was a prostitute who had never received guests. Although she did not receive guests, she knew everything and had many ways to serve people. A prostitute who grew up to be a daughter of a good family. Madame D frowned and looked up and down at the servant girl in front of her. She didn't look like a prostitute who came from a prostitute's house. I have been redeemed by old madam for several years. Old madam has been sending people to teach me. Everything I say and do is taught by old madam. The servant girl's face was not charming at all. Her behavior looked even more kind. Only when she slightly raised her eyes, there was a pair of bright eyes with a bit of mellow tenderness. She was just gentle and charming, without any trace of prostitution. She was a little shy and wanted to speak in a sweet voice. Madame D was very satisfied with this. She and Qin Huayong had been married for many years. Of course, she knew that Qin Huayong did not like that kind of prostitute. In the past, she also mentioned that the prostitute was too charming. When in Jiangzhou, Qin Huayong had always been very clean and never went to the brothel. He had always had a good impression of the brothel. However, the servant girl in front of her looked like a daughter of a good family, but she was soft and charming in her bones. Qin Huayong would definitely like her. After all, Shui Rulan was old, how could she compare with this servant girl? Well, let her stay here. Madame D was very satisfied, but suddenly she thought of one thing, mother prepared her so many years ago. Who did she prepare it for? The old maid waved her hand, and the servant girl left respectfully, behaving appropriately. Seeing that she retreated out of the room, the old maid lowered her voice and said, Madam, don't ask more about this. This servant girl was not originally prepared for you, but old madam really couldn't bear to see you suffer like this, so she chose one of them. Chapter 263. Madam, you don't have to worry about it. Old madam asked you not to tell anyone. You can't interfere in this kind of thing. The old maid lowered her voice and said cautiously. After saying that, she looked at Nanny Zhou beside her. Nanny Zhou was a smart person and said immediately, Madam, don't worry. I won't tell anyone. Madame D thought for a while and didn't ask any more questions. How can I send them there? He doesn't let my servants go out at all and won't come here. He is helping Shui Rulan, that bitch. Madame D turned her attention back and said with hatred. She pulled the embroidery thread on the corner of the quilt fiercely with a ferocious look. Don't worry, madam. These two servant girls are sent by our mansion to take care of you. Old madam said that you can't go out, so our mansion will send people to visit you from time to time. Every time they visit you, they will send someone to report to the son-in-law. Since these two servant girls are sent by our mansion, they can go out and report to the son-in-law occasionally. I will send one of them to talk to him later. The old maid said meaningfully. Okay, let's do that. Madame D gritted her teeth. Madam, it is said that you are sick. You are sick now, aren't you? You have to call a doctor to have a look and adjust the medicine. You can't afford to waste your health like this. The old maid continued. Yes, Madam has been in poor health these days, and we really need to find a doctor to treat her. It is also good to adjust the medicine. I don't know if old Madam has a good doctor to recommend. Nanny Zhou understood tacitly and immediately said. There is an excellent doctor at the corner of your front street. It is also close to your mansion. You can go there to see a doctor. The old maid said with a smile. Okay, I will tell the general about it later. Nanny Zhou nodded repeatedly. You'd better not tell him about it. You are now locked up like me. How can you go out casually? The old maid said. What should I do? Nanny Zhou spread out her hands and said anxiously. Now there are two servant girls outside, right? Moreover, they're here to help me recuperate. Aren't their words more accurate than yours? That's right. Today, I will act as a guide and help these two servant girls lead the way. Next time, it will be very natural for them to reply. The old maid smiled. Her words made Madame D and Nanny Zhou nod repeatedly. Since the matter was settled, the old maid was about to leave, but Madame D stopped her. Can you go and see Yuru? I don't know how she is now. Madame D said worriedly. Since Mei Shui came to take her letter to Madame of Duke Xing that day, there had been no news from her until now. Madame D felt faintly uneasy. The first miss is also grounded now. It's reasonable for me to see you, but it's unreasonable for me to see the first Mississippi. What's more, we can't make the general angry because of the two servant girls. The old maid advised. It was not that he could not go to see Qin Yuru, but he was afraid that this reason was not good enough to make Qin Huayong angry, and then the loss outweighed the gain. Is there any trouble outside about Qin Yuru? Madame D thought for a while and stopped asking about Qin Yuru. She started to inquire about the news outside. There were fewer people in her yard, and those who stayed were all locked up. Now she could not even send a message in. She didn't know whether Madame of Duke Xing immediately dealt with Shui Rulan after getting her letter that day. She had an agreement with Qian Yukai. She instigated the lady surnamed Lu to deal with Shui Rulan, make the trouble of Shui Rulan infinitely uncontrollable, and ruin Shui Rulan's reputation. After that, she had nothing to do with the lady surnamed Lu. Of course, she was a useless chess piece. Originally, the real deal with her was Qian Yukai. For this reason, she had transferred a sum of money to Qian Yukai in private. I haven't heard anything about Madame Shui outside. What's the matter, Madam? The old maid didn't understand Madame D's words, but she also heard the meaning in her words. She immediately asked in surprise. Nothing. I heard that someone wants to reveal everything about Shui Rulan. Madame D didn't want all her things to be known by an old maid, so she said vaguely. Madame wants to use Madame Shui's reputation to deal with her. To reveal Madame Shui's past. The old maid asked in confusion. Shui Rulan is just a widow. She needs the consent of her former husband's family before she remarries. If they have built a chastity memorial arch for her, how can she get married? What's more, she has a child. If this matter gets serious, this bitch will be finished. Since the old maid said so, Madame D couldn't suppress her anger for a while. Madam, you can't. The old maid's face changed dramatically. Why not? That bitch dares to snatch the position of my legal wife and actually forces me to this point. I want her to die, and she will die miserably. That evil creature also can't have a good life. I want Shui Rulan, the bitch, to be condemned by everyone. Madame D said with a gloomy face. Her long nails scratched the quilt fiercely a few times. Madam, this is not appropriate. If it really comes to this point, what will happen to the son-in-law? You are not only alone now, but also cousin Mississippi. If the son-in-law does something wrong, she will not have a good life, and Duke Yong's mansion will also be implicated. The old maid was anxious and said repeatedly. If the marriage of Duke Yong's mansion was not solved, to some extent, Qin's mansion and Duke Yong's mansion were one. How does Shui Rulan's matter have anything to do with Qin Huayong? Madame D said angrily and confusedly. Madam, you are confused. How can this matter not affect the foundation? Madame Shui's matter is not her own matter. If the son-in-law did not marry her, how could this happen? This kind of chastity memorial arch has to go through the imperial court, which is not the matter of a woman in the inner courtyard. She may even be accused of deceiving the emperor, which is a serious crime that can result in the execution of 9 generations of the emperor. The old maid was so anxious that cold sweat came down from her forehead. Then what should we do? Madame D also panicked. She had never expected such a result. Madame of Duke Xing did not say so at that time. But compared with Madame of Duke Xing, she was more willing to believe her mother. Madam, this matter has not been exposed yet, has it? The old maid calmed down after thinking for a few times. Not yet. Since you have not heard any rumors about that bitch, it has not been exposed yet. Madame D said uncertainly. She was still selfish in her heart, so she did not tell the whole thing. She just hinted to Nanny Zhou beside her and asked her to shut up. Nanny Zhou was also very panicked. Originally, she really wanted to tell the cause of the matter. But after being glared at by Madame D, she immediately shut up. Madam, please write a letter. I will help you take it to the person in charge. Ask him not to act rashly. After going back, ask old Madam to monitor him. It's better to suppress this kind of thing. Otherwise, the son-in-law and Madame Shui will not be well off, nor will Madam and cousin Miss. The old maid persuaded. But I am not reconciled. Thinking that Shui Rulan could now take care of the fetus peacefully, while she was locked up, the venom in Madame D's eyes almost overflowed. Madam, don't worry. Now with old Madam's method, you can take charge of Qin's mansion again in a few days. The old maid said. Okay, I will get up and write a letter. Although Madame D's hatred was hard to dissipate, she also knew that the old maid was right. She sat up from the bed with the help of Nanny Zhou, walked to the desk in front of the window, picked up a pen and wrote a few words. Then she put the pen into an envelope and handed it to the old maid. She then told an address and asked the old maid to send the letter to the first young master Qian. The old maid took it carefully, nodded repeatedly, and was about to leave. But she was stopped by Madame D. Since you are my mother's servant, you should naturally know that my original dowry shops are left in the capital city. After so many years of income, you should ask my mother to give me some money. I have been locked up here, so I need to spend a lot of money. Spending a lot of money to buy more people, Madame D felt that she needed more money now. Madam, you need money? The old maid did not expect that Madame D would suddenly ask this and looked very surprised. Of course I need money. I'm locked up, and I can't even send a message out. It's all because I can't use the money properly. So I want the income of these years. I'll ask my mother to send the money to me secretly. Madame D said. Well, I will go back and ask old Madam. The old maid said vaguely and did not dare to agree directly. Okay, remember to bring money next time you come. Madame D did not find the old maid's strange expression and waved her hand. Madam, then I will go back. I will also take the 2 servant girls outside and let them report to the son-in-law. The old maid said. Madame D went back to the bed and leaned against it. She slightly closed her eyes and waved her hand. The old maid left and stood at the door thoughtfully looking at Madame D inside the door. Then she turned and left. When she came to the yard, the 2 servant girls were still standing there obediently. Seeing her come out, they hurriedly bowed to her. The old maid said something in a low voice, and the two servant girls followed her out of the yard. Seeing that they were all from Duke Yong's mansion, the old maid guarding the door would certainly not stop them and directly let them go. "Madam, do you think?" Nanny Zhou slightly lifted the curtain and said hesitantly after seeing the old maid leave with the servant girls. "What's the matter?" Madame D asked. "When Madame mentioned money just now, she didn't seem to promise you anything at all," Nanny Zhou said. Just now she stood beside the old maid without saying a word, but it did not prevent her from hearing and seeing clearly. Since the madam mentioned the money, the old maid's face became a little unnatural. "Could it be that mother won't give me the money? When I got married, mother specially added those dowry shops for me. She was afraid that I would be wronged in Qin's mansion in the future. Now that I need it, mother will naturally give me money." Madame D did not believe that old Madame of Duke Yong would embezzle her money. "Madam, it is not old Madame who is in charge of Duke Yong's mansion now," Nanny Zhou hinted. Hearing her words, Madame D was silent for a moment. Now she was extremely displeased with Countess Yong and felt that all these troubles were caused by her. If she had readily agreed to marry Di Yan and Qin Yuru at that time, all these things would not have happened. "Humph, how dare she embezzle my money?" Madame D snorted coldly. "Madam, you must be vigilant. You can't take it lightly. In this world, there are many people who turn against each other because of money." Moreover, the old maid's reaction just now was a little strange. She was so eloquent before, but in the end, she didn't even say anything. Nanny Zhou said. Chapter 264. "Madam, when First Miss comes over next time, please find a chance to let First Miss visit those shops outside. You haven't had time to visit them since you came to the capital city for such a long time. Just go there and ask. If everything is good, Madam can rest assured." Nanny Zhou thought for a while and said. "Okay, I will listen to you." Madame D nodded and agreed. Compared with others, Madame D trusted Qin Yuru more. The old maid took the two servant girls to Qin Huayong's study. When she arrived at the door of the study, she saw a servant girl standing at the door in addition to the servant. The old maid had a good memory. She remembered that this servant girl was the servant girl she saw at second Miss Qin's place. "Little brother, please tell them that I am the supervisor old maid of Duke Yong's mansion. I sent two servant girls to serve Madame D. Now I have to go back. I want to ask the general for mercy. Can you send some medicinal materials here occasionally and let these two servant girls check them?" Since there was something, there was a reason to report. Now that Madame D was locked up, it was inconvenient for Shu Rulan to intervene in Madame D's affairs. Therefore, the most important person to report was Qin Huayong. A logical reason to let the servant girls see Qin Huayong was established. "You haven't gone back yet?" Before the servant said anything, Yujia looked up and down at the old maid and asked in surprise. "Not yet. I am going back and want to tell the general about it," the old maid said with a smile. "That's it? Okay, I will report it for you later. Now our miss is discussing something with the general. It's better not to disturb them." Yujia waved her hand and said. The servant who was going to go in stopped. "This, we have to tell the general." The old maid didn't intend to leave like this. This matter was different from the previous ones. She couldn't let Qin Wanru directly take responsibility. Forget it. If it really disturbs the general, who can bear the responsibility? Yujia said coldly with her face darkening. But the old maid still wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Yujia impatiently. Okay, it's really not a big deal. Our miss will promise you." Then she turned her head and whispered to the servant, as if the old maid and the two servant girls didn't exist. The old maid was ignored, and her face turned pale. She was the real henchman of old Madame Yong and dealt with some secret affairs. Even Madame D didn't know her, so she was very shrewd. After her face changed, she calmed down. There was even a hint of a smile on her face. Since second miss has taken on this matter, that's fine. There's one more thing that I'd like to trouble second miss with. When this servant went to see Great Aunt just now, I found that Great Aunt's illness was very serious. Is it possible for the manor to change a doctor for her and choose a new doctor with excellent medical skills? Madame D was not sick at all. She was just locked up, but everyone said that she was sick. Since she was sick, she would naturally invite a doctor. For the sake of everyone's face, the old maid only said that they would change a doctor, but did not mention that there was no doctor before. Is Madame D really seriously ill? Yujia looked surprised as if she didn't expect this. Yes, our aunt is really seriously ill. I'm afraid that the medicine she used before is not right, so we want to invite another doctor to cure our aunt first. Our Madame Dowager only has one daughter, so she is very distressed. If something really happens to her, how can our Madame Dowager live? The old maid looked sad and wiped her tears with a handkerchief, as if Madame D was really dying now. Her words also meant that if something really happened to Madame D, old Madame would never tolerate it. Yujia didn't know what to say. She could refuse an old maid's request, but she couldn't really suppress Madame D. After all, Madame D was the Madame of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Even if she was locked up, she could only say that she was sick to the public. Just you wait. Yujia said. Thank you, miss. The old maid showed a trace of complacency on her face, but her tone became more polite. Yujia turned and went into the room to report. In the room, Qin Wanru was holding a painting for Qin Huayong to appreciate. Among the rows of bamboos, an elegant scholar was playing the zither, and another man with a high hat and a broad belt was standing aside and appreciating. The whole painting had a kind of Wei Jin style, which was what Qin Huayong appreciated most. Father, can you see that this is an authentic work? Qin Wanru carefully identified it and said helplessly. Let me see it again. Qin Huayong looked more carefully. He gently rubbed a corner of the paper in his hand, looked at a seal on it, and carefully identified it. The room suddenly became quiet, and the sound of Qin Huayong rubbing the paper could almost be heard. When it was quiet, Yujia came in. General, second miss, people from Duke Yong's mansion are here to say goodbye. After saluting respectfully, Yujia reported in a well-behaved manner. Got it. Qin Huayong waved his hand without raising his head. Yujia hesitated for a moment, but still reported, people from Duke Yong's mansion said that Madame D is ill, and asked General to find a doctor to treat Madame D. They said that old Madame of their mansion is very worried about Madame D. Although Yujia's words had been very tactful, Qin Huayong still heard a little threat, so he snorted and said, just say that I got it, and I will find a doctor for her. Let old Madame rest assured and enjoy her life. Yes, I will go back now. But there is one more thing. Yujia's voice became low and she said timidly. What is it? Say it. Qin Huayong became more and more unhappy. He didn't want to hear more about Madame D. Madame D was brainless, and it was better for her to stay in the room and not come out, in case she messed up things again. It is said that Duke Yong's mansion will send some medicinal materials here in the future, and the two servant girls today will check and accept them, Yujia said. Okay, I got it. They can accept the medicinal materials sent by Duke Yong's mansion in the future, and they don't need to report to me anymore. Unexpectedly, it was such a trivial matter again. Qin Huayong became more and more impatient, waved his hand and said, just say that I got it, and let them leave. Yes, General. Yujia took a few steps back, turned around and went out of the room. Outside the room, an old maid stood there with a kind look and was talking with a servant. When she saw Yujia coming out, she hurriedly went forward with a smile and asked, Miss, what did the son-in-law say? Our general said that he got it, and he will find another doctor for Madame D. As for the medicinal materials sent by your mansion, just let them check and accept them, and they don't need to report this kind of thing to disturb the general's rest in the future. Yujie repeated Qin Huayong's words to the old maid. The old maid was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect that Qin Huayong would ask someone to pass such a message, and she couldn't keep the smile on her face. She sneered and said, "The medicinal materials sent by our mansion are sent to your mansion. After the servant girls check and accept them, they have to report to the son-in-law. How can they do it alone? Some medicinal materials are good, and they can't be put into the warehouse randomly. Do you mean that you want the general to check and put them into the warehouse personally?" Yujie sneered and asked. Her question was very impolite. The old maid forced a smile and said, "How can it be? I just need to report to the son-in-law." "Well, you can go back. You don't need to report anything in the future. It's just some medicinal materials. If you don't trust them, don't bring them here. These 2 servant girls are also from your mansion, right? If you can't trust the servant girls sent by your mansion, what else can you do?" Yujie sneered coldly. "Well, why don't I go in and talk to the general again?" The old maid looked behind her and tried to sound her out, unwilling to give up. Yujie took a step forward and stood in front of her. "The general has already decided on this matter. It doesn't matter if you say it again. At this moment, the general and our miss are discussing business. How can they have time to care about such a trivial matter? Nanny, you'd better go back first. If something is really lost in our mansion, we will solve it by ourselves. We won't find Duke Yong's mansion." This was a direct order to drive her away. The old maid helplessly looked at the slightly closed door behind Yujie and could only go back. She walked to the side and whispered a few words to the 2 servant girls. It seemed that she was telling them what they should pay attention to. As she spoke, she looked at the door expectantly. However, when she finished speaking, no one came out of the door. After she finished speaking, the 2 servant girls nodded and retreated to the side. At this time, the old maid had adjusted herself. She smiled and bowed to Yujie and the servant. Then she left, leaving the 2 servant girls behind. Yujie looked at the 2 servant girls and ignored them. She went into the room to serve the old maid. She just came to the door to stop the old maid. She knew that the old maid would not give up and would definitely find Qin Huayong again. She walked behind Qin Wanru and stood still. She winked at Qin Wanru, stretched out 2 fingers to make a gesture outside, and then put 2 fingers down to make a posture of standing there. Qin Wanru immediately understood. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and her eyes became deep. She even let the 2 servant girls stay. She was determined to see her father. In the last life, she did not know when the servant girl named Huang Rui met Qin Huayong. But when she knew, Huang Rui had been promoted to be a concubine, and she was the most favored one. On the surface, this servant girl looked as gentle as a good girl, but in fact, she was kind but vicious. However, Qin Huayong liked her very much and was obedient to her. Such a woman would never be as simple as she showed, not to mention that she had such a background. If it were not an accident, Qin Wanru would not know that this concubine Rui actually came from a brothel in the last life. She was a prostitute in a brothel. However, she did not have any coquettish behavior, but looked very gentle. In this life, she would not give this woman a chance to get close to Qin Huayong. "Father, I leave this painting with you first. You can tell me after you appraise it. I suddenly remember what my mother told me before. I have to go back first." With her watery eyes turning, she had an idea in her mind. She pushed away the paper in her hand and said softly with a smile. Chapter 265. Qin Wanru came out of the room and saw 2 servant girls standing in the yard. After standing for so long, the 2 servant girls were still very well behaved and stood motionless on the side. Qin Wanru walked over. Yujie rolled her eyes and hurried to follow her. "Are you the servant girls sent by Duke Yong's mansion?" Qin Wanru looked at the 2 servant girls up and down and finally fixed her eyes on the face of one of them. Both of them were very beautiful, but one of them was more beautiful and looked more like the daughter of a good family. Generally, the pretty girl from a humble family outside the mansion looked like this. With snow-white skin and a pair of beautiful eyes, she looked a little charming. With a slender waist, she just stood there and looked delicate and charming. What are your names? I'm Hongye. I'm Huang Rui. Hearing the question, the two servant girls hurried to return the salute respectfully. Their expressions were very gentle, which really made people have a good impression on them. What are you still doing here? Qin Wanru's face darkened. The two servant girls looked at each other. Huang Rui took 2 steps forward and said, "Second miss, we are afraid that the general will ask us if we stay here. Father has nothing to do. You can go back." Qin Wanru waved her hand and said, "Miss, Nanny just told us to wait here." Huang Rui glanced at Qin Wanru timidly and said, "She looked very pitiful." If someone didn't know it, he might think that the person standing in front of her was bullying her. However, it was Qin Wanru standing in front of her. Qin Wanru's watery eyes were clear and watery. She looked very pure, with a gentle smile and jade-like skin. Even if she just smiled, it made people feel that the girl in front of her had excellent temperament and was graceful. How could she be the kind of person who would bully others? You look so aggrieved. Are you deliberately making people think that our miss bullies you? Our miss just cares about you and asks a few more questions. What's wrong with you? Yujie was not happy and said coldly on the side. I didn't. Huang Rui was so flustered that she was about to cry. Her eyes were slightly red and she looked more pitiful. If a man in front of her saw her, he would probably pity her again. Qin Wanru glanced at the servant girl calmly with a trace of disgust in her eyes. This Huang Rui was very good at pretending. It was not a big deal, but she acted as if she had done something to her. She looked soft and weak on the surface, but in fact, she was extremely vicious in her heart. In her previous life, she had often displayed this kind of innocent and weak appearance in front of her father. That time, when he almost died in her hands, she had displayed an extremely weak and terrified expression. She had directly thrown herself into his father's arms and had even fainted in his arms. Since you didn't go. Father doesn't want to see you. Wanru said coldly. Second miss, I'm afraid that the general will ask about Duke Yong's mansion. Huang Rui still refused to leave. Before she came here, she told her many times that she must find a way to see Qin Huayong and find a way to make Qin Huayong fall in love with her. How could she leave at this time? Slap him in the face. Qin Wanru's face turned cold when he didn't leave. Yujie understood. She stepped forward and slapped Huang Rui hard. Huang Rui's delicate face immediately became red and swollen. Second miss, why do you? Huang Rui's tears fell down. She knelt down with a plop and cried miserably. You are now a servant girl of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Don't always talk about Duke Yong's mansion. Now you need to serve Madame D, which has nothing to do with me. I don't want to know how you serve her. You just need to serve Madame D well. You don't need to come to see me. Qin Wanru's smile was bright and beautiful, but also extremely cold. Second miss. Hongye, who was with Huang Rui, also panicked. She hurriedly knelt beside Huang Rui with a plop sound and whispered. When you arrive at Ningyuan Army General's mansion, you should know that your master is the master of Ningyuan Army General. You should forget everything in the past and don't think about something irrelevant. If someone asks you to do something, don't pay attention to it. Here, there is only one master. If you have 2 masters in your heart, the result will not be good. A sharp dark light flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. She said in a low and slow voice. Her clear watery eyes could almost reflect people's minds. Yes, second miss, we will leave right away. Hongye was timid. She answered in a hurry, trembling. After saying that, she pulled Huang Rui, who was still unwilling to leave, and hurriedly left. Miss, What do these two servant girls want to do? Yujie pointed at the two servant girls who left in a hurry and asked in confusion. I don't know if Duke Yong's mansion wants to do something again. Otherwise, how could they let these two servant girls come to see father again and again? Qin Wanru frowned slightly and muttered to herself with a little doubt. Miss, I know. Are these two servants sent by Duke Yong's mansion to the general? Yujie's eyes lit up. She seemed to think of something and lowered her voice. But this voice was just heard by the servant who stretched his ears to listen to them. Don't talk nonsense. Let's go. Qin Wanru spat at Yujie and said. Yes, miss, I am talking nonsense. Yujie hurriedly begged for mercy. The two of them walked to the gate of the courtyard, talking and laughing. Behind them, the manservant who was guarding outside rolled his eyes a few times, turned around, and went into the room to report. Qin Wanru walked to the gate of the courtyard and turned to the side. Taking advantage of the turning space, she looked at the position of the servant at the door of the room. As expected, the servant was gone. She could not help but have a touch of faint deepness in her eyes. Her father seemed to be very wary of everyone. When she came here today, he didn't say a word about her family background, as if he didn't care about all the rumors about her family background outside. He really behaved like a biological father. But Qin Wanru clearly knew that he was not. She sighed deeply. For a moment, she had mixed feelings and couldn't tell what kind of feeling she had. Miss, this time the servant girl named Huang Rui didn't see the general. What about the next time? Yujie lowered her voice and said. The slap just now was not light. Even if this girl wanted to do something, she would be embarrassed these days. But what about the next time? If this servant girl deliberately approached the general, it was really hard to say. When will Child D come? Qin Wanru didn't answer Yujie's topic. Her eyes flickered slightly and she asked ambiguously. Things happened one after another in Qin's mansion, and even Duke Yong's mansion was involved. Di Yan also returned to his Duke Yong's mansion before. At that time, it should be Duke Yong's mansion that wanted to cancel the engagement. But since Duke Yong came to the mansion, Di Yan lived in Qin's mansion from time to time. Even if Qin Yuru was grounded now, he would still go to see her. The relationship between them seemed to be peaceful. As long as Di Yan was in the mansion, he would go to see Qin Yuru. This attitude was not intimate, but not intimate either. I will go to inquire about Child D in a while. When mentioning Di Yan, Yujie immediately understood and nodded at once. This child was now with First Miss because he had no choice. No matter how she looked at it, he was not very willing. From the looks of it, his reputation had become like this, and the young miss had to bear a large part of the responsibility. As for why he still went to see First Miss now, it should be because he had no choice. And the biggest characteristic of this child was that he was soft-hearted. He couldn't bear to see women in tears, delicate and helpless, in Qin Huayong's study. The servant was clearly telling him what he had seen just now, from what the old maid of Duke Yong's mansion said after entering the door, and what Qin Wanru said and did when she went out to Yujie. Qin Huayong put down the picture scroll in his hand, and his eyes immediately became gloomy. He narrowed his eyes and said slowly after a while, "Don't let these two servant girls come to my study. Drive them away immediately when you see them." No matter what kind of idea Duke Yong's mansion had now, he was not willing to spoil things because of a servant girl. Qin Huayong had experienced many things. From the conversation between Qin Wanru and the two servant girls, he immediately knew that these two servant girls had other intentions. These two servant girls from Duke Yong's mansion had originally made him feel uneasy. "General, do you want to lock them up as well?" the servant suggested. All the people in Madame D's courtyard had been locked up. Even if these two servant girls were locked up as well, in the servant's opinion, it was also reasonable. "No, let's see what they want to do." Qin Huayong snorted coldly. Now he also hated Duke Yong's mansion very much. If it were not for the fact that Qin Yuru had no one to marry and could only marry Di Yan, he would also not want this marriage. Yes, General, then second miss. The servant was about to leave, but he stopped. Second miss is still young, just keep an eye on her. Qin Huayong looked down and refocused his attention on the picture scroll in front of him, and said ambiguously. Yes, General. The servant retreated, and the room immediately became quiet. However, Qin Huayong pushed the picture scroll in front of him, and his eyes fell on the air in front of him. He frowned tightly, as if there was something very difficult to solve that had not been solved yet. Qin Wanru did not expect that she would get a bag of Tang Qianyan flower seeds when she did not raise it well. It was said that it was a very beautiful bag of seeds. Holding the bag of seeds that was said to be Tang Qianyan seeds, Qin Wanru asked Nanny Yu in astonishment. Second miss, it is said that the unengaged young ladies of the families of officials above the 4th level in the capital city will each have a bag of flower seeds. Nanny Yu had just gone out to inquire about it, and now she received the news to report to Qin Wanru. Do I have to plant this? Qin Wanru looked at the small bag of seeds in her hand, and felt very helpless. She really did not know whether she could plant it or not. The pot that she had raised was considered a finished product, but it did not really look like it had really grown until now. Yes, it was said that when the time comes, there will be a flower appreciation party, and whoever grows the most beautiful flowers will be greatly rewarded. Nanny Yu said. Chapter 266. Can they be planted with this? Qin Wanru looked at the small bag of flower seeds in her hand and felt that it was mysterious enough. Miss, now many people in the capital city are inviting some experienced gardeners into their mansions. The purpose is to accompany the Tang Qianyan this time. Miss, do you think you should also invite one? If you are late, I'm afraid that all the good gardeners will be invited. Nanny Yu reminded her. On the way back, she heard that several gardeners who were good at taking care of flowers and plants had been hired. No need. Qin Wanru thought for a while and shook her head. Why not? Miss, although there are servants in our mansion who take care of flowers and plants, they are not so good at it. Especially for flowers and plants like the Tang Qianyan, which are very delicate. We have to find someone to take care of it. Nanny Yu frowned with worry. After returning to the mansion, Nanny Yu specially investigated and found that the gardeners in the mansion had no knowledge of Tang Qianyan at all. They only knew how to take care of ordinary flowers and plants. It takes a long time for the flowers to grow seeds and bloom. There must be many people who can't take care of them well. Qin Wanru said. She had no clue at all, and she didn't want to stand out in this kind of order issued by the palace. She didn't know which noble in the palace gave the order. The one who could mobilize the forces of various aristocratic families was either the Empress Dowager or the Empress. Others did not have such great power. So what was the purpose of planting the Tang Qianyan? Did it really need such a great power to plant flowers and plants? Qin Wanru subconsciously felt that it was not simple. She kept a respectful distance from this kind of thing and did not want to stand out. It was safe to be the same as most of the young ladies who didn't grow well or didn't plant well. Before figuring out the truth of the matter, she would not make any rash moves. The best way was to blend in with the crowd. Even if most people don't take care of them well, there are always a few who are excellent. Nanny Yu did not understand the other meaning in Qin Wanru's words. The meaning of the word was only explained according to the literal meaning. Will the excellent ones be like this? Qin Wanru was still smiling with her watery eyes leisurely. Nanny Yu was stunned by this question. After a long while, she said, I don't know, but I think the palace will reward them. The palace will not reward for no reason, and they have spent so much manpower and material resources. If it is not for the big request, they will not disturb so many unmarried misses from aristocratic families, and they are all unmarried. Qin Wanru said meaningfully. Being reminded by Qin Wanru, Nanny Yu was shocked and her face changed immediately. She unconsciously lowered her voice and asked hesitantly, to choose concubines for the princes? Prince Yu and the other princes have not chosen concubines. This time, they are all unmarried young ladies from aristocratic families who are not engaged. Are selected by the palace. This is the palace's decree. It should be for these princes. Nanny Yu, Chu Luyue and the others were young, but they had to observe for a period of time to choose concubines. It was very possible to take the seed of Tang Qianyan as part of the concubine selection. Qin believed that was not only Wanru, but also the Qin v Wanru, Shi, 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 1, A, 1. 1, 1, 1. Her words made Nanny Yu exclaim in a low voice. She was a little flustered. Let's leave it at that. We'll plant the flowers ourselves. It'll be great if we can grow them. If we can't, there's nothing we can do. After planting them, we'll put them at my window and I'll take care of them. Qin Wanru said with a smile. Miss, will you plant them yourself? Nanny Yu looked at the pot of Tang Qianyan at the window and was not confident. It doesn't matter, as long as I do my best. Qin Wanru said without any burden. Then, miss, what about this invitation? Since Qin Wanru had made up her mind, Nanny Yu could only follow her wishes and turn to look at the invitation. Along with Tang Qianyan, there was also a big red invitation card. It was an invitation from the palace. The empress had personally invited these young ladies of aristocratic families who had received the seeds to attend a flower viewing party in the palace. The prize was this Tang Qianyan. Most of the Tang Qianyan that bloomed in autumn would also bloom in winter, but there were many of them and they were more precious. Of course we have to attend the invitation from the palace. Did Qin Yuru get one? Qin Wanru picked up the exquisite invitation and asked. First miss doesn't have one because she's engaged. Even if she's not engaged, it's impossible for her to get one. I heard that the young ladies who got the invitation this time are all of good character. Nanny Yu said. Right now, the most talked about thing in the capital was the seed of Bao Tang Qianyan and the invitation from the palace. This result was expected. Qin Yuru's reputation was not just a little bit bad now. This also made Nanny Yu more and more sure that this matter had something to do with the selection of concubines for the princes. Although the eldest prince, Prince Yu, Chu Luyue, was not very old, how could the marriage of the royal family be simple? It was normal for them to choose their concubines slowly. In Ningyuan army general's mansion, only Qin Wanru was going to attend the banquet. In the next few days, Madame Dowager was even more attentive. She and Shui Rulan rushed to make a few more sets of clothes for Qin Wanru. On this day, Qin Wanru was also driven out of the mansion by Madame Dowager to pick some suitable jewelry. Madame Dowager said that the original style of jewelry was a little old-fashioned and asked her to pick some more suitable ones. The carriage went out of the mansion and turned to the bustling streets of the capital city. The curtain was lifted, but the gauze curtain was down. Qin Wanru sat by the window and looked out of the window. When the carriage turned a few streets, she pointed to a big gold jewelry shop outside and nodded. Stop the carriage. Let's go to this shop. Yujia immediately raised her voice and said to the coachman. The coachman took the order and stopped the carriage in the alley beside the door. Yujia put on the curtain hat for Qin Wanru and helped her get off the carriage. The two of them walked into the shop one after the other. Just from its appearance, one could tell that this shop was extraordinary. It was a large shop with 3 bays and 3 floors. Just by standing at the door, one could tell that the people who came to this shop were either rich or respectable. The door was very lively. From time to time, one could see some well-dressed misses and madams of aristocratic families entering the shop. The business was very good. Qin Wanru entered the door with Yujia and first walked around downstairs. There were many people downstairs. Many women were choosing, and several places were surrounded by a lot of people. Qin Wanru walked around and didn't find anything particularly suitable, so she took Yujia to the second floor. Compared with downstairs, the second floor was more exquisite. Near the window, there were private seats separated by screens. You could sit there and wait for people or enjoy the scenery. Some men who accompanied her sat in the private seats and chatted, so they didn't feel bored waiting. Qin Wanru came up, looked at the upper floor, and walked to the counter in the middle. There were also several misses around. Obviously, they knew each other, and a large group of servant girls served them. Looking at the sets of exquisite jewelry they were choosing, Qin Wanru calmly stepped back to the side. Those pieces of jewelry were obviously expensive. Although her grandmother had given her money, Qin Wanru thought it was unnecessary to spend so much money to buy them. She also wanted to save a sum of money to invest in her shop so that she could have more flexible cash flow in the future. Thinking of this, she didn't go to the crowd, but turned to the side. The sets of golden headgear and necklaces were very exquisite on the counter. Finally, Qin Wanru stood in front of a cabinet, pointed to a hairpin inside, and said, "Can you show me this hairpin?" "Okay, miss, please wait a moment." The shop assistant answered very cleverly, and carefully took out the hairpin that Qin Wanru liked from inside. The hairpin was very exquisite and beautiful. The flower shape on it was the shape of a tang qianyan. It was not very big, but when the petals were stretched out, the stamens were dotted, which was very vivid, just like a real blooming tang qianyan. There were also a few beads on one end of the hairpin, which fell from the stamens and made the stamens more delicate and shiny. Although it didn't look so eye-catching at first glance, it was very beautiful and exquisite when looked at carefully. It seemed to be better than the hairpins of the previous shopkeeper. He also spent a lot of effort on the thin stamens. Each stamen was different, but each had its own charm. He described the difference between the stamens and petals with golden ornaments. Qin Wanru liked it very much at first sight. Seeing the shop assistant take it out, she was about to reach out to take it, but it was snatched by a hand from the side. She turned her head in astonishment and saw a woman standing beside her, looking at the hairpin she snatched from Qin Wanru with a look of surprise. "Third cousin, look, doesn't this hairpin look like the flower of the tang qianyan in your window?" The woman held the hairpin to show it to the man beside her. Qin Wanru's eyes turned to the man beside her, and she couldn't help sighing in her heart. Life was really full of surprises. She had tried her best to see Wen Shiqi before, and wanted to remind him that his cousin was not a good person, so that he should be careful. When they met in Huaguang Temple, she also knew from Wen Shiqi's words that he should have investigated this cousin, but at that time he had doubts about her. In order to avoid misunderstanding, Qin Wanru didn't want to see Wen Shiqi now. She really didn't have any other thoughts about him, and just wanted to repay his kindness in the last life. However, when she wanted to see him, she couldn't see him no matter how hard she tried. When she didn't want to see him, she actually met him on the way. She had to admit that this kind of thing was really hard to describe. He looked at Gu Shishu, who was standing beside Wen Shiqi. This was his cousin, the cousin miss who had been raised in the Prime Minister's mansion. After he entered the Prime Minister's mansion, this cousin miss had plotted against him many times. After being reborn, she didn't expect to meet her again at this time. "Miss, this hairpin was chosen by our miss first. How can you snatch it from our miss?" Yu Jie stepped forward, pointed at the hairpin in Gu Shishu's hand, and said loudly. Chapter 267. You haven't bought it yet. How can you say it belongs to your miss? Seeing that her miss was in a weak position, a servant girl standing behind Gu Shishu stood up and glared at Qin Wanru and Yu Jie, as if they were the ones who had been robbed of the hairpin. Qin Wanru withdrew her eyes from Wen Shiqi's face and looked at Gu Shishu's face. She saw her arched eyebrows slightly frowning and her eyes slightly red, as if she had been greatly wronged. Qin Wanru slightly raised the corners of her mouth, and her eyes were calm and deep. "Miss, I saw this hairpin first and asked the waiter to take it out. Can you let me see it first?" Qin Wanru saw it first and asked the waiter to take it out. In this case, since Qin Wanru liked it, other customers were not allowed to rob it before Qin Wanru gave it up. Wen Shiqi's eyes turned from Qin Wanru to Yu Jie. He didn't recognize Qin Wanru, who was wearing a veil hat at first, but when she spoke just now, he immediately recognized her. When he saw Yujia clearly, he was more certain that the person in front of him was Qin Wanru. "Cousin, give the hairpin back to this miss," Wen Shiqi said gently. "Cousin, I didn't rob her hairpin." Hearing that Wen Shiqi didn't help her but vaguely admitted the crime for her, Gu Shishu was about to cry. She lowered her head and wiped the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief, looking more pitiful. Although they made a small noise, they still attracted the attention of the people around them, especially the word, rob. Ladies from aristocratic families paid most attention to their dignity, so they couldn't rob. "Miss, can you give me back the hairpin in your hand? I'm going to pay for it." Qin Wanru ignored Gu Shishu's pitiful look and said naturally. Her watery eyes fell on Gu Shishu coldly. This was not the Deputy Prime Minister's mansion in the last life, and there were no Deputy Prime Minister and Madame Zhua who were extremely partial to Gu Shishu. Gu Shishu's tricks in the last life didn't work here at all. Moreover, Wen Shiqi beside her was not the Wen Shiqi who was blinded by family affection in the last life. Although they didn't say a word to each other, Qin Wanru could still clearly hear the alienation in Wen Shiqi's words. It seemed that her warning really worked. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, revealing a smile under his veil hat. "Miss, can you give me the hairpin? I'll pay you double the price. This hairpin is my cousin's favorite Tang Qianyan." Seeing that Qin Wanru was unmoved and that Wen Shiqi had no intention to stand up for her, Gu Shishu had to hold back the tears in her eyes, timidly raised the hairpin, and pleaded. It seemed that the reason why she wanted this hairpin was entirely because of Wen Shiqi. On the one hand, it also pointed out that the relationship between them was unusual. A gentleman should help others achieve their goals. If he was a gentleman, he should give up the hairpin at this time. Even if she wasn't very willing, she would still express her blessings and compromise in front of everyone. She had to show the gentleness and kindness of a young lady from an aristocratic family. Especially at this time, everyone guessed that it might have something to do with those princes. If there was such a chance to show their gentleness and kindness, many ladies present would be willing to give up a hairpin to promote their reputation. But she met Qin Wanru today. "I'm really sorry. My mother also likes Tang Qinyan's hairpin. I liked this hairpin first. Please give it back to me, miss." Qin Wanru bowed sideways, then raised her body and said lightly. Although the relationship between cousins could also be considered as kinship, it seemed a bit ambiguous and not very presentable when it came to the hairpin. However, Qin Wanru's words about her mother were about filial piety. Compared with this kind of ambiguous meaning, it seemed more generous and decent. With such a sentence, Gu Shishu had already fallen into a disadvantageous position. Many ladies present were also reminded by Qin Wanru's words. They covered their mouths with handkerchiefs and looked at Gu Shishu with a bit of sarcasm. Those who knew Wen Shiqi looked at Gu Shishu with more and more scornful eyes. Wasn't this the cousin who was raised in Deputy Prime Minister's mansion? It was said that this lady seemed to admire third young Master Wen. But the goddess liked him, but Prince Xiang didn't. Third young Master Wen obviously stood on the side with the mentality of a bystander. He didn't say a word for Gu Shishu, nor did he mean to defend her. Third cousin. Gu Shishu didn't expect Qin Wanru to be so difficult to deal with. She turned her head, looked at Wen Shiqi sadly, and held the hairpin tightly in her hand. She was not willing to let go of this hairpin. What she liked was hers. "Cousin, give the hairpin back to this lady. This lady bought it for my mother. It's not good for you to take someone else's hairpin." Wen Shiqi finally opened his mouth under Gu Shishu's expectant eyes. But he didn't mean to stand on Gu Shishu's side at all. With one sentence, he settled the dispute between them. He meant that Gu Shishu was rude and made trouble and robbed Qin Wanru's hairpin. In Deputy Prime Minister's mansion, Gu Shishu had always been the best at using means to get the attention of people in the mansion, and also to make people yield to her in everything. She didn't expect that Wen Shiqi would help an outsider for a hairpin today. She was ashamed and angry at the moment, and her face turned blue and white. Looking at the sarcastic eyes of the people around her, she couldn't hold back the tears in her eyes anymore. Suddenly, she threw the hairpin in her hand fiercely, turned to cover her face and cried. "Miss, miss!" Her servant girl hurriedly chased after her. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the hairpin that fell to the ground, and her eyes were dark. The delicate flower on the hairpin on the ground had been broken. Gu Shishu was such a person. If she couldn't get what she liked, she would rather destroy it than give it to others. In the last life, when Shichi was destroyed by her in the same way. Seeing that the hairpin was broken, the shop assistant was so scared that his face turned pale. He hurried out to pick up the hairpin and the broken one on the ground, looked at Qin Wanru with a sad face and said, "Miss, you see, as a small shop assistant, he couldn't afford such a hairpin. This hairpin belongs to me." Of course, Qin Wanru understood this and said. But her words were gently interrupted by Wen Shichi, "This hairpin belongs to me. It was my cousin who was not sensible and snatched your hairpin." Because she failed to snatch it, she was angry and broke the hairpin. This responsibility was originally Gu Shishu's, and Wen Shichi didn't intend to cover it up for her. In the past, he didn't care about it and only regarded her as a young cousin. Since his younger sister died, he treated her as his younger sister. Besides, they grew up together, so he didn't have much wariness about her. Who would have thought that this would actually nourish her ambition? She wanted to hook up with second brother and Wen Shichi. She really wanted to control her brother in the palm of her hand. After knowing this, Wen Shichi and Gu Shishu only maintained a superficial affinity. At this time, of course, he would not go out to chase after her as she wanted, nor would he push the blame to Qin Wanru. Originally, he had regarded her as a cousin who grew up with him and sincerely protected her, but now, he would not be polite. "How can I do that? Since I saw this hairpin, it belongs to me." Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at Wen Shichi and said lightly. Her words were very alienated, as if she wanted to distance herself from Wen Shichi. "Well, in this case, miss, choose another hairpin. If you like it, I will pay for it to compensate for the loss of this hairpin." Seeing Qin Wanru refuse, Wen Shichi had to say. "Thank you, young master. Thank you, young master. It's just that it's not proper for young master to pay for it, not to mention that it's something used by women. I appreciate young master's kindness, but I'd better go and see young master's cousin. It seems that she's very angry." "Don't get angry with young master." Qin Wanru continued to refuse calmly. Her words were very polite and alienated, as if she didn't want to have anything to do with him. Even if Wen Shichi wanted to say something, he couldn't go on at this time. He could only helplessly cup his hands to Qin Wanru, and after a sigh, he turned to chase in the direction where Gu Shishu just left. The whole thing didn't happen for a long time, but there were many sounds of Gu Shishu smashing the hairpin in anger. Many misses and madams from aristocratic families turned to this side. When they saw Wen Shichi leave, some familiar ones began to whisper. "Is he the third young master of the Deputy Prime Minister's mansion?" "Yes, he is the third young master of the Deputy Prime Minister's mansion. I heard that he is likely to pass the exam in spring." "That's the cousin of their family. Didn't Madam of the Deputy Prime Minister say that this niece is good and very gentle? This kind of domineering behavior is really... This cousin miss must have taken a fancy to third young master one. She doesn't know who she is." Wen Shichi was also a famous young master from a famous family in the capital city. He was good-looking, so many misses liked him. However, he had always been polite to women and didn't want to get close to them. So some misses who knew him just now didn't dare to come up and talk to him. But now that they left, they all spoke of this cousin miss with disdain. Moreover, she despised Gu Shishu openly. Although they might not have seen the whole scene of Gu Shishu's behavior just now, from the conversation between Wen Shichi and Qin Wanru, they could understand that Miss Gu's behavior was really unacceptable. Even so, Madam of the Deputy Prime Minister kept praising her, which made some misses who had taken a fancy to Wen Shichi jealous and hateful. Of course, They wouldn't let go of such an opportunity to ridicule her. They even thought of telling their elders when they went back. Next time Madam of the Deputy Prime Minister praised this niece, they could mention what happened today. They wanted to see if Madam of the Deputy Prime Minister would continue to praise this niece. She was just a foster girl, but she dared to have designs on third young Master Wen, who was favored by many aristocratic families in the capital city. In this way, there were many misses who didn't like her. In the past, they didn't find her fault, but now they found that she was completely different from the rumors, so they all talked about her with disdain. While they were talking, the shop assistant breathed a sigh of relief. He nodded and bowed gratefully. He was about to wrap up the broken hairpin and introduce other accessories to Qin Wanru with enthusiasm. He was afraid that Qin Wanru would be dissatisfied. Chapter 268. Qin Wanru turned to look at the owner of this hand. When she saw clearly who it was, she had to sigh that it was an unlucky year. How could she meet so many acquaintances today? This person was not someone to be trifled with. The fourth prince, Prince Xian, Chu Liuxin, did not have a good impression of her when he was in Rui, and great elder princess's mansion. She was afraid that Xiao Yuanhao's matter was triggered because of him, which made him feel ashamed and then blame her. This hairpin is good. I want it. Chu Liuxin grabbed the hairpin and looked at Qin Wanru provocatively. He also recognized Qin Wanru because he saw Yujie. When he came in just now, when Shiqi happened to go out, so he did not see the whole scene. But after he recognized Qin Wanru, he did not intend to let Qin Wanru marry him, so he immediately grabbed the hairpin. Your Highness, do you want a broken hairpin? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and helplessly looked at Chu Liuxin, who was obviously looking for trouble. So what if I like it? Can't I? Chu Liuxin said arrogantly. As long as you like it. Qin Wanru speechlessly looked at the broken hairpin in his hand and said slowly after a while. Come on, pay. Seeing that Qin Wanru did not dare to compete with him, Chu Liuxin felt very proud and exalted. He also felt that Qin Wanru was a little more pleasing to the eye. The little eunuch behind him hurried over and carefully reached out to take it. He stole a glance at his master and did not understand why his master was so happy to grab a broken hairpin. But no matter what, the master was the most important, as long as the master was happy. He reached into his arms and took out the bank note to pay the bill. After seeing the little eunuch pay the bill, Qin Wanru said with a smile, that miss will thank you, Your Highness. I didn't expect that her broken hairpin could make Your Highness so happy. The complacency on Chu Liuxin's face suddenly disappeared. He looked at the hairpin in the little eunuch's hand and then looked at Qin Wanru with a little anger on his face. He just thought that the hairpin was Qin Wanru's. Even if it was broken, he still wanted to make Qin Wanru lose face. This was the evidence that Qin Wanru had lost the dignity of a miss from an aristocratic family. A miss from an aristocratic family like her should be dignified and decent wherever she went. She should not break her hairpin. Whose lousy hairpin is this? Chu Liuxin said angrily. I don't know who it is either. I don't know the young lady just now. Qin Wanru bowed sideways and said goodbye. She didn't want to accompany Prince Xian, who came with bad intentions. Since Your Highness likes this hairpin, it's great that the shop can avoid a loss. After that, without looking at the angry Chu Liuxin, he turned around and walked out with Yujie. In public, Chu Liuxin could not really stop Qin Wanru. He could only stare at Qin Wanru's back with hatred, only thinking that this girl was more and more hateful. Your Highness, do you still want to take a look? The little eunuch said carefully. They entered this shop to choose a suitable birthday gift for Chu Liuxin's biological mother, concubine Ming. What are you looking at? I'm not looking anymore. Let's go. Chu Liuxin said angrily. He looked at Qin Wanru's back angrily with a pair of handsome eyes, only feeling that Qin Wanru was becoming more and more annoying. She was really an annoying girl. When they met for the first time, she didn't let him have a good time. After that, she didn't get along with him every time. Maybe she didn't get along with him. He swung his sleeves and walked out of the shop, only to see that Qin Wanru had gone to the side alley, where the carriage of Qin's mansion was parked. He remembered the mark on it. Let's go. Chu Liuxin rolled his eyes and lifted his legs to walk to his carriage. The little eunuch looked at the carriage of Qin's mansion, and then looked at the carriage of his mansion. He hurriedly followed. Why did he feel that this matter was not over yet? Qin Wanru got on her carriage and ordered the carriage to go to the shop that Nanny Dong bought for her. It was still early, so she could choose a suitable hairpin later. As soon as the carriage turned a corner, Qin Wanru, who was sitting in the carriage, felt that the carriage seemed to be hit by something. If Yujie hadn't protected her in time, she would have hit her head. What's going on? Yujie asked outside the carriage after protecting Qin Wanru, who was still in shock, to sit down. There's a carriage squeezed to one side. The coachman looked awkwardly at the large, luxurious carriage beside him and said helplessly. The road was actually not narrow, but the carriage of this lord had to squeeze into him like this. After squeezing again and again, the Qin Manor's carriage was squeezed to the corner, and the road ahead was almost blocked. Let other carriages pass first. Qin Wanru thought that the carriage had taken the lead and said, Miss, that carriage doesn't move. The coachman looked at the carriage that also stopped and said, Miss, I'm going to see which mansion's carriage is so rude. Yujie was angry, lifted the curtain, and was about to go out. It turned out that it was not the carriage of another mansion that accidentally bumped into her carriage, but the carriage of another mansion that forced her carriage to stop. But she didn't know who made things difficult for her. Yujie, stop for a moment. Seeing that Yujie lifted the curtain and was about to go out, Qin Wanru stopped her and reached out to lift a corner of the curtain, trying to see which carriage was full of malice. When she lifted the curtain, the carriage next to her also lifted the curtain. Chu Liuxin's proud smile froze for a moment when he saw Qin Wanru's pure eyes. It had been some time since he last saw Qin Wanru in Rui, and great elder princess mansion. Qin Wanru's face already had the softness and purity of a young girl. When her watery eyes fell on Chu Liuxin's face, Chu Liuxin's handsome face immediately turned slightly red. He inexplicably felt that he had gone too far. In fact, it was quite undignified for him to be so calculative with a girl. The two carriages were very close to each other, and the windows were almost opened at the same time. When they looked at each other, they immediately felt very close to each other, so close that Chu Liuxin could almost see Qin Wanru's jade-like skin clearly. The eyelashes above her big watery eyes were like butterfly wings. They fluttered twice, leaving two uneven shadows on her pink face. What do you mean, Prince Xin? Qin Wanru did not expect that the opposite was Chu Liuxin, nor did she expect that Chu Liuxin would also open the window at this time. But she reacted very quickly and calmed down. After looking at him silently for a few times, she asked. Looking at the delicate and beautiful little face, Chu Liuxin suddenly felt that his mind was blank. At this time, he did not know what to say. The little eunuch sitting next to him hurriedly and gently pulled the corner of his clothes. I have something to ask you. Chu Liuxin's reaction was not slow, and he immediately reacted. He coughed in a low voice and said with a straight face. What's the urgent matter, Your Highness Prince Xin? Why do you force my carriage to stop on the side of the road? Qin Wanru tilted her head and looked ahead. There was a turn at the intersection ahead, and this road happened to be occupied by the wide carriage of Prince Xion's mansion. If her carriage continued to move, it would hit a shop on the side. It's a very important thing. It's the hairpin just now. I don't want it. Chu Liuxin hesitated for a while, and at this time, he finally came to his senses. What do you mean, Your Highness Prince Xin? Qin Wanru did not understand what he meant. She frowned slightly. Just now, he tried his best to grab her hairpin, but at this time, he actually did not want it anymore. I mean, Looking at Qin Wanru's clear watery eyes, Chu Liuxin felt that his heart was beating a little faster, and he was very uncomfortable. He sat up straight and looked for a suitable reason. He even regretted what he had done just now. Why was he so impulsive just now? He asked the carriage of Qin's mansion to push the carriage of Qin's mansion aside. Until now, he could not find a suitable reason. Bang! A loud crash came to Qin Wanru's ears. In Qin Wanru's astonished eyes, the carriage of Prince Xian's mansion shook a few times and hit a shop in front. It was a rice and flour shop. After being hit by the carriage of Prince Xian's mansion, the wooden pillar at the head shook and almost broke. The carriage of Prince Xian's mansion was overturned in front of Qin Wanru. Fortunately, it was stuck next to the pillar and did not completely overturn. It was half tilted there. The guards hurriedly jumped off their horses and pulled Chu Liuxin, who was in a daze, out of the carriage. When they saw that the young prince was fine, the guards breathed a sigh of relief. Who hit me and smashed their carriage? Chu Liuxin reached out to cover his face. He did not know where his handsome face had hit just now, and he felt a dull pain. His eyes flashed over and met Qin Wanru's astonished watery eyes. Under her long eyelashes, her watery eyes were astonished, and then a very faint smile appeared. The curtain of the carriage fell. Chu Liuxin became more and more angry. His whole face turned red, and he angrily stared at the carriage that had pushed his carriage into the shop. Seeing that his guards were timid and did not dare to come forward, he became more and more annoyed. He only felt that he had been disgraced by them today. No matter who was in the opposite carriage, he would never spare him. Fourth brother, do you want to smash my carriage? A somewhat gloomy voice came from the carriage that came later. A guard went over to roll up the curtain of the carriage. When he saw Chu Liuxin leaning against the carriage, Chu Liuxin only felt that he could not swallow his anger, but he could not spit it out either. His whole face was twisted. How could it be Chu Liuxin? Why did they meet Chu Liuxin? Fourth brother, your carriage stopped here. Don't you want to enter this shop? Let me help you. Chu Liuxin raised his face and looked at Chu Liuxin with a gloomy smile. Chu Liuxin's anger was suddenly frozen, and then slowly disappeared. Third brother, you misunderstood me. I just happened to walk here and accidentally squeezed with other carriages. I was just about to leave. Chu Liuxin finally swallowed his anger. This time, if it was anyone else, he would not so easily stop, even if it was Chu Luyue or Chu Liuzhou. But it was Chu Liuxin. He had to suffer this loss even if he did not want to. Well, it turns out that fourth brother is not going to the shop. I misunderstood you. Then my carriage will move back, and fourth brother can go out first. Chu Liuxin's smile became gentle. He waved his hand, and his carriage moved back to make a large space. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.